unexpected power loss to the main rotor system. Basically, the difference between training for auto rotations and real life auto rotations and what to expect and how that's done. I have a recording of it that will be up on the YouTube, and yeah, that was a good turnout. There's about 100 people for that one.
Oh wow, that is a very good turnout.
Yeah, that was through the FAST program, the SPANS thing, and I recently, I told you I was invited to be a representative, which I'm honored and it's exciting. And we will start actually running some of these through the SPANS program too, and start giving out wings credit in the future, which is exciting.
They absolutely should, man.
Yeah.
You're putting that stuff out there. I was looking at the credit, and
Yeah.
they have a huge need for helicopter guys because I was one for years,
Yeah.
years and years and years, and it they don't have enough helicopter guys, and they're just like, please, at least if you put on like one a year, we're happy. So if you're doing this many, that'll be really great.
Good. I'm glad to hear
Also,
that.
too,
Yeah, I'm glad to hear
it,
that.
it, it gives you connections and also credibility. Even though the barriers to entry are so low,
Yeah.
he's got to do like an annual training and some like online stuff. Yeah, no, I'm no longer one for nothing bad. It's just
Timing.
I was going through a lot of stuff in life all at the same time, and
Yeah.
I was getting past due on the training, and I'm like, I told him, I was like, hey, I can't do your minimum qualifications, and I don't have the time to join your training. I want to be that guy that you're always having to chase after.
Right.
And I was like, let me get my life straight first.
Yeah.
So they respected that, but I need to join back up again. It's been I'm to the point now where I have the flexibility to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Maybe we can team up on some stuff in the future too, and really start putting out some great content. I mean, the feedback has been awesome because I think people, like you said, are looking for it. It's just there's not a lot of helicopter stuff, so it's awesome.
Yeah, the part is like a lot of it's like locally, the show up in person kind of stuff, and that's the problem.
Right.
Online medium is a lot better. I realize though for a Friday night, it's like who's gonna show up on a Friday night? People are really passionate about helicopters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the thing to be doing on this Friday night. I can tell you that much. If you're into helicopters, this is the place to be right
talking
now.
about DPE observations.
Yeah.
Actually,
Exactly.
curious for a previous speaker then, because one of my points in there is the engine failure, and I have some thoughts on that.
Good.
And through the ACS a little bit on it, but also just like how it's being taught is a disservice to the industry. So
I'm glad to hear that, and I will relay some of this to Pete because he'll be happy to hear some of I'm sure what you're going to talk about too. And I already
also here's what he said to make sure we're in alignment, you know?
Yeah. No, I kind of anticipate that's going to be the case, but I'm excited to hear what you have so going. I already have some questions too, based off some of the things Pete had mentioned about training and some of your thoughts on that too. So.
Hey, well, we got the time. We'll wait for people to show up. We can have those conversations now.
Yeah, well, I wanna give people the opportunity to for those that are listening right now before we do get started to kind of jot down notes and after Mike's presentation is over to really ask questions, and in the spirit of learning, that's the purpose of this group is not only one to I'm going to be repeating myself, so I should probably we should just kick it off probably. We've got a good chunk here, about almost 15 people or so, and I'm sure some will stream in. I know that some are supposed to be coming that aren't here yet, but I do a little bit of a formal intro too, so that kind of eats up some time, but maybe we'll just give it another minute.
No, we can take our time. That's fine.
Cool.
Now, where are you at in the country now?
I'm in Denver. Yeah. And it's convection season, I think, is a good way to put it. There's always there's storms popping up periodically throughout the day, and we had it's just some afternoon showers and shut down my fixed wing training flight today, unfortunately, but it's for the better. I mean, it's hard to predict where these things are going to kind of happen or pop up right now. The whole area right now is under a SIGMET, so that's just pretty typical for out here. Share my screen and show you guys what I'm looking at here. But Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I've got aviation weather up on my. I work in front of a computer all day, so I have it up pretty much all day, and I'm always sort of um, looking at the weather and can I squeeze in a flight here, squeeze in a flight there, and obviously mornings are better. But I mean, this is a really good example of what we're looking at around here today. You know, especially in the afternoon. Here's KDEN, and then here's BJC right over here. So it's just sort of day in the life right now. But a lot of stuff going on in the West right now, which is good. I think there's a lot of fires out there, so we get these good weather patterns and dropping a lot of moisture, which is nice. But yeah, you know, we see this and then it's just better not to fly, I think. You know, we just wait until the next better day or wait until the morning or the afternoon or something.
I just remember with the Gulf of Mexico, sitting on these platforms, sometimes you can literally watch like the clouds start to form and then like grow and then go through all three stages and then dissipate and start raining. You just watch them grow and combine and all that. It's really cool to watch.
It is.
But it was always funny because if you're, the typical thing is, oh, there's thunderstorms, I shouldn't go fly, right? Well, every day was forecast for thunderstorms in the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, excuse me. So it was always a running joke. And you're like, well, why do I read the TAF? Because it's just going to tell me the same thing. It's going to tell me thunderstorms.
Yeah. So you guys are just monitoring constantly, though, I imagine then.
Well, yeah, Gulf flying is very different.
Yeah.
It's because it's just you in the open ocean, and I mean, depends on where you flew in different areas, but like the areas that I flew a lot of, we had long legs. Like I flew out of the west side, so either leaving Cameron or Galveston, and it was a 120-mile plus straight leg, and there was very few platforms between you and where I was going. So it was you in the open ocean. So you learn for the 5 Ds of flying, dive, dog, dive and dodge, around those storms. And it's nothing unsafe. You just watch those storms and go around them. You had enough fuel to do it.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. So are you going? So you're going out here to these? Are these oil rigs offshore that have METARs and stuff?
See your screen here.
Oh.
Yeah. So some of those platforms do have weather observations.
Yeah.
Now they're not the most maintained.
Yeah.
So, for example, like there's a couple of ones out there that was always a joke, but it was like the sensor was fogged over.
Oh.
So like randomly be a clear blue 22 day and it'd be still reporting like half mile, quarter mile visibility until the one day that it actually was accurate, and then you're like, oh crap, it's actually bad right there.
Yeah. It's like the sensor who cried wolf.
Exactly, right? It was like, it's a broke clock's right, twice a day. So in this case, the sensor was right sometimes, and that was definitely a fun, humbling experience. It's dynamic, but it's crazy to say though. Just the Gulf has changed so much over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
It's
look at all those though.
There's a lot more platforms that got taken out of the water now. There's a lot less out there compared to when I started in the years I was there. It's changed so much. So it's I get tell war stories and all that fun stuff, but it's too like as a check airman for a large oil and gas company out that way. We would require the pilots to come back their first time coming back after 6 months, and after that it was their yearly recurrent training. And it was it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We tell them like, hey, you're gonna come back, and like you're gonna come back in 6 months or a year from now, and we're gonna have a talk, and we talked about inadvertent IMC. We did a whole sim session about it, how to avoid it. But it's not a matter. It's a matter when they went inadvertent somehow, some way. Just because of how bad the weather can get out there so quickly, especially like sea fog and all that other stuff. So we'd have some really interesting conversations about weather avoidance, and you didn't want them to do it. You wanted them to make good decisions and avoid it, but it was almost impossible to, just how crazy the weather got out there.
Yeah, that's really interesting because people talk a lot about that as sort of the career path is moving into the Gulf. And maybe someday that would be an interesting conversation to have a little more depth for those of us in the group that are considering that career path.
The other thing too is that like you talk to most guys in the Gulf that flown long enough. It's not a matter if, it's a matter of when. A lot of them have been over an IMC, but they've all come. Most of them, I mean, come back. Back in the early 2000s, there was like at least 1 to 3 on average fatal accidents in the Gulf of Mexico. Now it's very, very few.
That's good.
But the reason for the invert IMC was a lot of guys didn't have as much issues with one training, and then two also, they didn't slow down. You think about it, when you're over land, you typically want to use scud run, right? You come down, you slow down because you're losing visibility. So you try to slow everything down that you can see and avoid, right? When you have the wide open ocean and there's no obstacles, guys will still come down, but they're going to hit a floor and it doesn't matter anymore. So they actually keep their speed up. And so the aircraft, the helicopter is much more stable going 100 knots plus.
Yeah.
And you're able to control the instruments much better. And I think that's one of the big differences to why those guys out there have been inverting and not had much of an issue as it is with guys that are up in the mountains, or because one, there's less obstacles.
Right.
You know, once you climb to safe altitude, you're not going to hit many platforms once you get above 500 feet.
Right.
And then two, like, the speed thing, because you're not trying to scud run. You're trying to I'm trying to get out of this area.
Right.
Because usually a better area is going to, somewhere close by or something that's going to be better weather unless you really made bad decisions. So those are some of the differences. I think that's why it's a little more survivable, I would say it that way, but that's complete speculation.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, that's kind of cool. I like that idea of just like getting a little lower, but just keeping that airspeed, and then your helicopter's flying in a position, in a place that it likes to be. It's in a happy place moving that fast. That's pretty cool.
It's a much more stable platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, and same thing too. I teach guys like IMC, aircraft upset training. You'll watch them once they get below about that 60 knots, 50 knots or so. Depends on the helicopter. The aircraft gets very unstable, and then they start basically chasing the attitude indicator, and then it just goes downhill from there. I've done so many periods and sim sessions and those cool. If you've seen the I forget the name of the brand now, where the visor fogs over.
Icarus.
The click of a button.
Icarus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Icarus. Yeah. And using those two, like I've done a lot of instrument invert and IMC training with guys, and and you watch their response to things. But yeah, once you get slow, it gets really unstable, and that's a really important piece on going full circle back to the commercial maneuvers.
Yeah.
Doing the invert and IMC or the unusual attitude and maneuvering by instruments. Watching that airspeed, you don't want to get super slow.
Too slow. Yeah. That's great. That's a conversation too for any of you listening that has a presentation or a lesson plan on IIMC. That might be a good thing to look into and kind of add to your discussion. Also, anybody listening who has Icarus experience, I'd like to talk about that somewhere down the road too. All right, we're about 18:15 almost here, so we're going to kick things off. We got a good turnout today. For those of you that are just joining us for the first time, thank you for being here. Glad you're here. This is the Helicopter Pilot Study Group, founded on Discord by myself, and helped really growing it by Jay over at Leading Edge, and Jay down in Florida, and Mike Triana, our military Blackhawk pilot. We really started this thing early on, and it's grown into a great community. So we're thrilled that you all are here. The whole purpose of this study group is for helicopter pilots, students of all stages of flight to network, to come together, and really for the opportunity to work on presentations, work on your lesson plans, present them in a safe space, in a good group where we can then kind of discuss it afterwards, right? So in the spirit of learning, presentations are generally done, lesson plans, tasks from the ACS, followed by group discussion. And that's the normal workflow for the Helicopter Pilot Study Group. Occasionally, we have special presenters, special speakers today. We have DPE. Mike Hume is a guy I know well. I flew with him down in Total Flight Solutions in North Carolina. And we reconnected recently, and I asked him to join the group, and he graciously was happy to join. He sat in on a presentation, and today he's here to help us understand a little bit observations from his perspective as a DPE in the helicopter pilot world. This is being recorded, so thanks to everyone for being here. I won't hold us up anymore. I'll let Mike take it from here.
Okay, guys. I'm just honored that you guys would ask me to come out and speak. I'll try to keep it interesting. I know we originally asked, hey, your observations of the DPE. I made a presentation here, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of topics that are really not a lot of cool pictures or anything like that. So it is going to be a little bit of death by PowerPoint, but I'll try to keep it interesting. That and also I want to be a couple disclaimers because this is going out to the internet and being, as you said, being recorded. One, so I am a designee on the FAA for the FAA as a designated pilot examiner. As I say though, I represent the FAA when it comes to the authority to conduct check rides. However, any of my opinions or discussions here today are not on behalf of the FAA. All right, so just a couple disclaimers on that piece. Also being said, we're gonna dig into some of the stuff. I'm gonna go into some regs on some things that I see normally on check rides. Your local DP at your flight school may view things differently. And that is one thing that is frustrating across the industry, is that we're all human, right? And we all have our pet peeves, we all have our emphasis items. So the way I conduct check ride may not be the same as your local DP, or he may has other things. I might be wrong, he might be wrong. I'm not saying anything either way, but I'm going to cover stuff that I personally have seen as issues, and I'm going to explain to you my reasoning behind it and where the references come from. I try to bring facts or bring references to everything I talk about on this subject. And if there's anything about my opinion, I will try to emphasize, hey, this is my opinion. All right, so we get the legal disclaimers out of the way. I don't have many cool pictures in here, but I will show you a kind of a cool video here from one of my previous jobs doing advanced instruction. If you can see, this might be a little bit of lag here. That's a 407. I'm teaching a guy to do full down auto rotations in a 407 GX. That's what's low skid, so you touch slightly on the heels to come down with. So that's kind of the cool wow factor. Hopefully you guys actually saw that okay. All right, so a little bit about me. So I'm a DP out of the North Texas FSDO, so the DFW area specifically. However, I do travel for check rides. So if you guys need any check ride assistance in your local area, feel free to reach out. But I've had a very extremely blessed or lucky career. Just kind of a couple things here. I'm a Gold Seal CFI. Previously, I've been a Part 135 Director of Operations. I've been a Part 135 Chief Pilot. I've been a Part 135 Check Airman on multiple certificates. I've done 141 management, helped run a flight school. It was actually one of the earlier things in my career. Brand new flight instructor and worked my way up into managing that flight school. Of course, a 141 check instructor. I've also been a director of training and educational program coordinator for like a national flight instructor renewal course, FERC. I was doing 2 to 3 FERCs across the country a year, teaching classes of anywhere between 25 to almost 100 students sometimes. Done a lot of advanced training, OEM level stuff, doing all your full down auto rotation, stuck pedal, FADEC manual, all the interesting stuff that most of the primary flight schools say are too dangerous to teach. I was out there teaching, had a great time doing it, all the fun advanced stuff. Also worked in offshore environments, both for VFR ships as well as IFR multi-engine crewed aircraft. I was also a check airman, a lead check airman for one of their programs over there. Also a simulator instructor, doing 297s, instrument stuff. So really seeing the CRM environment, crew environment, teaching and evaluating on that side of things. I'm currently employed with the Fort Worth Police Department. I'm flying the air support ship out of Fort Worth, Texas. So I'm currently doing that. The schedule allowed, and it's a lot of fun. Also an NVG instructor, and I put a little note there, advanced maneuvers, not just the legal NVG instructor teach you to do NVGs, but I did all the same maneuvers that I did in the daytime, all the advanced stuck pedal, autos, etc. I did at night under NVGs. So I've had a lot of fun career doing that kind of stuff, but it really does change your perspective on a lot of those things. Now, I forgot to mention here, I originally went to school at Embry-Riddle, and the training provider that they had for their helicopter program back that day was very risk averse, I'll say it that way. Everything was unsafe, except for the way they did it. So it's funny looking back and seeing where I came from versus what I've done in my career. Has been a lot of fun. All right, so to say, I am a DP now, so I'm able to do that on my time off from the police department. So they asked me to go over some stuff that issues I've seen, things like that. And also, guys, this is supposed to be a little interactive here. So as I go through these topics, feel free to kind of ask questions. It's okay to interrupt me here if you want to, and we can hash this out. Please don't let me leave this topic without, if you don't have any kind of questions. If I can't answer or I needed to look it up or something like that, we can talk about it afterwards. But please don't let your questions go unanswered.
Yeah, that's great. Encourage the interaction. I like that. And then too, if you guys want to leave questions for after, by all means. But yeah, thanks, Mike. That'd be great to interact with you. That's awesome.
Yeah, of course. Come on. I'm here teaching this for you guys.
Cool.
So you guys are in attendance if you have any questions on this. Is there a way though to see gauge interaction, see a raise of hands or anything like that?
Yeah, there's the chat, which I have open in the upper right. People can certainly jump in there. You can hit the chat button if you like to, and it should pop up. Yep. That would be a good place if you guys want to raise a hand or just say, "Hey, question."
Yeah, or if you have a question you want to write down as opposed to ask.
Cool.
All right, so let me gauge the room here a little bit. How many people are working actively on their CFI or going to be working on their CFI, CFII soon?
Just man.
I see one of you guys there, but okay. I would say probably a majority of the guys here.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay, so I did this presentation kind of geared towards you guys, either already as CFIs or working towards your CFI. I didn't really write this for the private pilots or student pilot getting ready for the private check ride because this is a broad topic here. So I'm going to go through different things here, but airman validation. All right, so basically showing up and make sure the airman is even qualified to take the check ride, which ironically enough, most check rides in the conduct, for me to do from beginning for a walk in the door to actually finish the check ride for a private commercial, etc., it takes about 4 to maybe 5 hours total. Depending on how many rabbit holes we go down. It takes quite a bit. And actually, surprising enough, one huge piece of the time it takes is actually the validating the airmen and the aircraft. That takes quite a lot of time. It's the logbook reviews and all that stuff like that. As a CFI, or as getting ready to take a check ride as the student, the more that you can organize your stuff, the better. That's why having the tabs in your logbook, highlighting the important stuff that I'm looking for, all that's great. I've seen these little sheets that are oh, this is my total time, and here's this, and this, which is great. However, I can't go off that. I have to validate with your actual logbook entries. So if you're going to do those little cheat sheet things, at least put the dates in which for the flights that you did, put the dates down there. That at least helps me or any of the DP find that reference in your logbook alongside of that. All right, but I want to point out here. All right, so endorsements, are they even correct? So the gold standard here everyone goes to is the advisory circular 6165. Latest version is Kilo, I believe. They keep changing them. But so what happens is most CFIs will go check that AC and then just copy and paste what's in there. Right? Well, I want to point out to you on the helicopter side, I see this all the time, is that they'll copy and paste. The endorsement, kind of right here, I certifies, receives required training, and they'll usually list most of the time the references right here. Oh, you said someone said my slides are still showing about me.
No, they're we see them. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we see them. They're maybe someone's lagging, but yeah, I see your airman validation. The AC 6165.
Just want to make sure.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I just want to point out on the advisory circular, most of the references there that they reference, they've cleaned it up a lot better now. So if you're copying this second paragraph, I certify required training, you notice that it says 107 and 109, which is very broad, which is great. That's acceptable. If you start going into the subcategories and you're copying and pasting from the AC, a lot of the references are actually for airplane. So I bring this example right here, Alpha 37. You see the references here 103 Foxtrot, 107 Bravo, and 61 109, right? So on that one, if you see here, it says 107B. So I put here 107B is airs operations for the airplane category single engine rating. Well, that doesn't really apply, right? So I see this all the time when reviewing endorsements. That's a simple fix. And it's just like hey, just scratch out that number or that letter and put Charlie as opposed to Bravo, right? That's not a big problem here, but I just want to bring out to your attention is that always cross-reference the references if you're going to include them on your endorsements. Same thing too, a lot of the generic logbooks that are printed, they have a lot of these already put in there in the back. Again, they're written for the airplanes. So just you can scratch it out and put in the correct letter or reference, but just make sure you're not endorsing something for technically it's invalid. It's kind of ridiculous because you intended to do the right thing, but just being technically correct is important. So just want to point that out. Any questions on this one? Cool. All right, additional category. I see this a lot. So on this, ironically enough, as much as the fixed wing counterparts like to talk crap about us helicopter guys, typically when it comes to add-ons, they're airplane guys trying to get their helicopter add-on. Usually, I mean, we go the other way too, but it's in terms of the training side of things, you see a lot more on the other side. So as an instructor, I've talked to a lot of fixed wing instructors. They've never touched an add-on guy, and I went and got my commercial add-on this summer. And they didn't know what to do with me. They were completely perplexed. Let me first say, as a new CFI, when I was teaching primary students, I had so many add-ons, and I do so many add-on check rides. So I see a lot of these things here. But when it comes to additional category add-ons for the check ride, they require different endorsements. All right. So, for example, add-ons, for example, airplane to helicopter, they are not required to have a written test. However, because they're not required to have a written test, there is a different endorsement they must be given. And this endorsement is referenced in 6163B2. And it's basically attesting you, the CFI, if you're the recommending instructor, they recommend the CFI is saying that they have the required aeronautical knowledge to operate that aircraft. So instead of getting a written test, they're getting an endorsement from the CFI. And so they have to have said endorsement from the CFI to go for their check ride. Okay, another thing that I see, and it happens all the time, and again, this is not malicious. The CFI is meant to do the right thing. In fact, they're a little over-restrictive, but I'll open up their logbook for either a private or commercial add-on, and they'll have all of these endorsements for solo. And they're all out of 6187 and 6193, just like a normal private pilot, right? I look at it and I chuckle. I'm like, well, that's great, but that's the wrong endorsement, and you've over-endorsed them, but these don't apply. And they all look at me funny, like, what are you talking about? It's for solo. And I'm like, yes, but read the top section right here. If you lucky, I have the screenshot right here. So subpart C is in the regulations. That's 6181 to 6195. And it's student pilots, right? So even though as the CFI, right, and this add-on, they are your student, they are not student pilots. They are rated pilots. If they hold a private, they are a private pilot. If they are commercial, they're a commercial pilot. They are not student pilots. So none of the endorsements in this section, in subpart C of the regulations, none of those endorsements are valid for them as an add-on. So that begs the question, how are they supposed to solo the aircraft legally? This is where 6131 Delta 2 comes in. All right, so there's an endorsement, and it basically says have endorsed for the instructor. There is a reference to this in the AC, thankfully, so you can reference that. So you give that endorsement in order to say that you're proficient to act as solo in the aircraft. However, I want to put a big caveat to this one. Unlike for the student pilot endorsements where you have 90-day limitations and they have to be endorsed for every cross country, all that fun stuff, there's no expiration and there's no limitations for the standard 6131 Delta 2 endorsement. There is nothing. So technically, it's valid for as long as they want to hold it. So I recommend to any CFIs that are going to be issuing or working with add-on guys, when you give them the solo endorsement, give them some limitations, the same kind of stuff you would on a student pilot endorsements. but also give yourself an expiration. And personally, especially with add-on guys, one thing that I always did was basically put in like only valid to solo in insert flight school's named aircraft and approved by, or if like only valid with the approval of insert flight school's name. That gives you some COAA because who's to say they finish with you? And you just gave them endorsement to solo an aircraft they're not rated for. So they can then like go over down the street to the other flight school or just random their friend and go fly that helicopter on your certificate.
I got a quick question on that, sir.
Yeah.
So when you're working with owners, in that respect, how does that work? Recently had one. I gave one in April, and now that you were saying this is kind of like, oh, great. I didn't put an expiration date because I was thinking that we were going to continue working together, and now we're not. So, how does that kind of work? Is he just still flying under my endorsement, I'm guessing?
I mean, he could. That's what they need to look at. So if if he is, then you need to tell him, you're like, hey, I no longer, and you can, I need to see your log. I forgot to give you something, and then fill in the expiration after the fact, or you can just give him in writing some kind of certification that like, hey, I'm no longer authorizing you to solo this aircraft. When it comes to owners, that's a very interesting dilemma, and there's no perfect way to do it. It all is case dependent on the individual. So obviously you want to put in some CYAs. I know some flight schools are like, hey, if you're going to train in your helicopter at our school, like you have to keep it here and we're going to have the keys and you need to check out with me. Other CFIs are like, hey, I'm just going to, endorse you for every flight, or you need to check in with me and da-da-da. It depends on the relationship. I've definitely had some students that I was a little leery of, so I made sure I was a lot more CYA than other people, that I was like, this guy is so risk averse, I'm encouraging him to go fly. I know he's not going to do something behind my back. So it really depends on the circumstance. When it comes to this solo endorsement specifically, though, it doesn't matter who it is. I always gave them an expiration date, and I always gave them limitations like weather, other caveats to that endorsement. That was just my personal COA thing, but I just want to bring that to your attention.
Okay. With that, how would you deliver that by mail, or how does this work?
That is something that you probably going to have to get some legal counsel on. I'm sorry to have to not give you an answer that you're seeking on that one, but that's going to be more of a legal discussion that I can't really speak to.
Right.
Really sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, on that same topic, I have a question. When another instructor endorses a student after you, does that trump your endorsement? Like for solo flight? How does that work?
Are you talking about 6131, or are you talking about with the 90-day period?
I mean, it could be either. I mean, it could be for, let's call it 90-day student. I mean, call it solo or add-on or whatever it is, right? I mean, so like if you get a 90-day student, right, and then you sign them off, you leave the flight school, blah, 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 and then, 30 days later, another instructor signs them off also, but you still have 60 days technically left on yours.
Yeah.
But then another instructor's already given a 90 days. So now, like, if something happens, whose certificate is it on?
Yeah, so again, like, consult with your aviation attorneys. But since another instructor, I'd already been working with them and gave them the dual and already endorsed them to go solo in that realm, I would say technically it's like, hey, whoever touched them last kind of deal is going to be the one that they're going to be, the FAA in terms of liability is going to be looking at. So you already had someone else. I wouldn't say like replaces it or trumps it. They have every right to contact you, but you're like, yeah, no, the other guy's working with him, and he's the one that checked out the aircraft's been working with him. Just that alone, the fact that the student is not talking to you anymore, he's talking to this other person, this other party, to go conduct these solo flights, and that CFI is the one that's overseeing the training now and responsible for them. That alone is kind of going to be the responsible party just by default. Again, that's just my opinion, but that just kind of makes logical sense in the terms of chain of custody. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate that.
No problem. And last but not least, for add-ons, this has caught a lot of people, where you get like an airplane guy that, stop flying. Hey, I'm gonna get a helicopter now, and decides to jump all the way to the helicopter side. That's a little bit of a ooh when they get to the check ride, because they need a current flight review on the certificate that they hold. So that's a very important cat. The same reason why for drone pilots, if you're rated pilot, you're going to add the drone certificate to it. You have to have a current flight review. You have to prove it. It's a really big deal with the FAA. It's the same reason. You are adding a privilege to your existing certificate. So you have to hold the privileges of that certificate. It's happened quite a bit. So guys get ready for the check ride. They show up and they're like, ooh. And I'm like, all right, cool. Let me see your flight review. And they're like, oh, I hadn't had that in 7 years. I'm like, well, you gotta go get one, which is really frustrating to them too, because they don't want to fly airplanes anymore. So when you get an add-on student, when you're first, talking with them and talking with the whole process, like, hey, when's the last time you flew an airplane, or whatever certificate they hold, right? When's the last time you flew that aircraft? Do you have a current flight review? If so, you might want to just go get that, and that way we have 2 years to get your helicopter training done. And get that out of the way, because that really sucks when they've been focusing on a helicopter and they have to go back and fly an airplane. So I see a note in here, I guess from Jay, about the screw-up situation. Which situation are you referring to?
Oh, I was just saying the situation you said where we had the same thing. A guy always got a bunch of R22 stuff done. I think he got to commercial. 3 years later, he tries to come and start doing fixed wing add-on, and he hadn't been in a helicopter for 3 or 4 years, and he had to go back and get a flight review to his commercial standards in R22 before he could start training in a Cessna 172. That is ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at the flight school say they can't, you can obviously start training with them, to my knowledge. But in order to take the check ride, and they have to add to the certificate, yeah. So at the flight school's trying to COA themselves, make sure you can do it first. So I get that. It's just like having to get a medical. But yeah, it can be a definite issue. So I'm letting that information out there, because I hate to say this, but most new CFIs don't know this. And unfortunately, I have a group of maybe 10 or 15 people in this room, and this digital room. Is this new to anybody? If so, great. I'm glad I'm covering this. I know some people have seen familiar faces and I've covered with them directly, but I go to new flight schools, and part of me is DPE. I'm supposed to be a mentor. And so typically the first couple of check rides that I've done with a new CFI, new flight school, is a lot of getting to know each other. And they're trying to like, oh, what is he going to ask? What is he like? And they debrief their students all like, it's almost like a full debrief with the student after the fact. And I hate to say this, but a lot of like new instructors in flight schools don't like tell or don't pass the information down along to other CFIs, especially with the add-on stuff. And they always look at me funny when I'm like, oh yeah, this is missing. Thankfully, all this stuff can be fixed, especially the solo stuff. Hey, you endorse them for 6187. I need them to have the valid stuff here. And that's where the thing is like, hey, rip out the old endorsements, put the right ones in, and they intended everything perfectly. Now, again, this is where a little gray area here, and the FAA will have to speak on this one. But if you endorse them for all the stuff for a student pilot, you intended to do the right thing, and then you can go back and give them the right endorsement later. That was a clerical error. So that's something just to be aware of. I don't view that as, and again, your local FSDO will have to address that, but I don't view that at all as, trying to do the wrong thing. Your due diligence to do the right thing. You just had made a clerical error you didn't know. So anyways, SR-73. So I know that's the common training aircraft in here going through, and part of the validation of the airmen reviewing this stuff here, make sure they have the SFAR endorsements, all that fun stuff. Well, if you notice, they changed the SFAR endorsement. I'm aging myself back when I first started training. But they've changed it since then. But I have it slide right here, and I want to point this out to you because I know that this is not being taught properly, especially on the private level. And I even know people on the CFI level that are not even comfortable doing these maneuvers. And so I know they're not being taught the right way. So on SR 73, I took a little cut out of this. They repeat similar verbiage for both the 22 and the 44 in order to solo the helicopter as well as be PIC of the helicopter. They have to accomplish this flight training elements. All right. So auto rotation procedures, energy management, including utilization of a combination of flight control inputs and maneuvering to prevent overshooting, undershooting, and selecting landing area from an entry and altitude that permits safe recovery. Auto rotations at an entry altitude that permits safe maneuvering and recovery utilizing minimum rate of descent configuration and maximum glide configuration. Engine rotor RPM control without the use of the governor and low rotor RPM direction and recovery. My point here, if I had, I've seen many either add-on students to when I was running a flight school or they came from somewhere else, either on the private or commercial level, and we enter an auto and they're like, I'm like, all right, give me short, long to the spot. And they're like, I'm going to be short. And I go, okay, what are you going to do about that? Go around? And I'm like, no, do something about it, dude. Like, fly the helicopter, go into max glide, do these combinations. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Or they might be able to list them to me. Or like, oh yeah, my CFI showed me that once, but they're not able to actually do it. And I know so many flight school and instructors too that are deathly scared to hear the low rotor horn go off. Well, if you read through the RFM or POH, excuse me, in the Robinson, max glide is a combination of airspeed and rotor RPM. You have to do both to work. So if they're not comfortable doing that, well, then we have to make sure the instructors and the CFIs are more comfortable doing that and teaching that. But right there in regulation, in order for them to solo the helicopter and also be PIC of the helicopter, so before the check ride, they should have had this training and in depth to it. At least twice it's required. So they need to have this stuff. And it's really simple when I'm debriefing students. Oh, cool. Like, how's your training going? Yeah, like, you have the SFAR. Cool. Like, hey, what do you think of max glide? I pose like that to students. Like, hey, what do you think of max glide? And they're like, oh, if the guy tells me, I don't know. I've never done that before. I'm like, oh, cool. Hey, let's grab your CFI for a second. Let's have a chat. All right. And sometimes it's the cop out. Oh yeah, I showed them that one or two. Oh, remember I did that one flight I showed you because we were short. Like technically that meets the rule, but are they proficient enough to handle that helicopter and make overshoot, undershooting, to hit a spot? And I say reasonably. All right, you're not expecting them to go hit the maximum all the way and do all advanced stuff. No, I used to teach that stuff, but they need to at least be able to enter an auto rotation and see if they're going to be short, long to the spot. And then at that point, be able to make some corrections. And then, yes, at the private level, it says right in the ACS to make corrections to avoid undershooting, overshooting. That's what it's supposed to be. And most of the time on the CFI level, especially on private, they're like, oh, I can just like kick it out of trim a little bit, and that only helps you if you're going to be long, but not if you're going to be short. So, what are your tools available to you to adjust the energy in this rotor system to hit the spot within reason, right? So that's really an important piece there. Again, there's a difference between what I would love to see versus what I need to see. And as long as they can attest that they've been demonstrated this stuff and done it with them, their instructor, that meets the SFAR requirements, that's fine. But I see a lot of these instructors that are not teaching this. Hopefully your school is a good school and is more comfortable doing this, and we can have a discussion about this now. I'm going to pause, but
yeah, in your opinion, do you think that's why Robinson developed that instructor course?
So I personally do not know too much about the Robinson instructor course. I've seen some behind the scenes content about what they're producing on the back end, and it's excellent material, by the way. And I think, Robinson is very proactive in terms of trying to standardize and trying to emphasize safety. So are they probably trying to hit this on that? Absolutely. I just know them as a culture. They're going to try to hit this stuff. But there's a reason why they changed the SFAR to include this verbiage, because it didn't say minimum rate, maximum glide. It just said energy management. So they specifically added that in there to prevent undershooting, overshooting, and the minimum rate max glide. They added that in there on purpose to make sure that this was being taught to the students. Because I know that when I went through, it wasn't until CFI that I was taught how to do a max glide or a minimum rate. auto rotation. The only thing that we learned to adjust our spot was S turns and kicking it out of trim. Like that was all the tools I had until I actually went somewhere that taught me all these other tools. Now, bonus points. I took this out of the 44. The 22 is slightly different. Thank you. There you go. I was going to say bonus points, whoever noticed it in there. The R22, they did not include minimum rate configuration for the R22. I can't speak to the the reason why, but my logic tells me they didn't want them getting down into that low of and in fact, it's not even published. But well, the interesting part is too, like in older manuals, they reference this maneuver. Like I can tell you the numbers, but I know these numbers exist, but they kind of took them out and stopped mentioning it because you're getting in such a low energy situation. And they're worried about the low rotor issues with it. So it's quite funny. And again, I'm aging myself on some of that. Okay, private pilot, some of the common issues. Again, I'm still talking about validating the airmen on this stuff. I don't see too many issues with flight times and stuff like that on the private level. Usually those are pretty much dialed in. I don't see many issues. Now, as a DPE, we reserve the right to refuse for whatever reason. So if the DPE that's in your local area refuses to count that, then unfortunately that's his prerogative, that he doesn't want to do that. Exactly. I flew in the high desert when I first learned to fly, and then also I've flown a lot of nighttime over the city, and I've flown in rural areas too, where it's dark out there. The same thing, flying at night under an overcast sky versus a full bright night with a full moon. Like all this stuff changes, but again, the FAA requirement is night based on a time that's set for night. All right, so if they wanted you to have specific illumination to fly, they would put that in the requirements. There isn't. So that's where I stand on it, and that's the way that regs stand on it. That's my thoughts on it. I'm going to stick back to what the regulations say, what's valid to count. All right. Okay. One more thing. Commercial. Okay. The aircraft. So when they implemented the ACS, they added in some extra maneuvers. They added in the unusual attitude recovery and maneuvering by instruments to the commercial. The commercial is a VFR Checkride. Well, they added these extra instrument referencing maneuvers to a VFR Checkride. Well, that was to match and also emphasize safety, because a big safety risk is inadvertent IMC and the safety of the aircraft, and that's a big accident portion, so they want to make sure pilots can do this. And also to match what's required for most 135 check rides. 135 check rides, your 293s in a helicopter, required every 12 months. On that check ride, they were supposed to do unusual attitude recovery, inadvertent IMC recovery to include an instrument approach. And back in the day, if you had only single instruments, you had to do a partial panel, which made it even more difficult. So that was the matching industry. However, this opened this interesting dilemma of, well, what equipment is required to do these maneuvers? Now, if you look at 135 equipment requirements, not a lot of equipment is required. Not a lot at all. You need to have a turn coordinator and an attitude indicator to fly at night, pretty much. And for years and years and years and years and years, the industry has had no problem flying with just those two instruments for pilots to do a full-blown instrument approach. Now, granted, these are already experienced commercial pilots, but they're still able to conduct these maneuvers and fly to standards. Now, there always was an issue on those maneuvers on the 135 side, because there was no, on a VFR check ride, what standards you hold them to for the maneuvering piece, right? Is it, you can't hold them to instrument standards because it's not an instrument unless they were on the instrument program, like a 297 on the 135 certificate. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Well, when the FAA added this to the ACS, right, they didn't specify what equipment's required for this maneuver to be tested. So that became a very interesting issue. And so across the FAA, different FSDOs have come up with different solutions. And when one of the early ACS training videos came out, they discussed this and they said, well, to do these maneuvers, what needs to be on the helicopter, and the FAA said at the time, and this was just an FAA inspector, right, not coming from legal, said you need to have a full panel. Which was like, oh man, for the R22 flight schools out there doing commercial in the R22, that's pretty darn hard to do that. A lot of flight schools just went with the, hey, we just need to add the, attitude indicator. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of answers out there. Unfortunately, each local FSDO had created based on questions from DPEs and or flight schools, and they got answers from their local FSDOs about what equipment needs to be installed in the helicopter. And flight school A over here says, all you need is an attitude indicator. Flight school over here says, oh, you need to have an attitude indicator and a turn coordinator, or an HSI, or some kind of gyroscopic heading indicator. You have to have two. And then this flight school over here says, no, you need to, or this phys over here says, you need to have a full panel. And I do check rides across the country. I go all over the country doing check rides. And this became a problem because they asked me, hey, and I was under a certain opinion at the time. And they're like, hey, what equipment do you need to do this check ride? I was like, okay, I just need this. I just need these equipment, and that's all I need because we've been doing this on the 135 side for so long. And they're like, interesting, because all the other examiners in the area won't do them because we only have this equipment. And I was like, okay, well, hold on. If everyone else is not doing it, let me make sure I'm not the one at fault here. And anyways, did some research, talked to my managing specialist, and then done the FAA channels. And long story short, I actually brought this, me personally went all the way up to basically the Airman Certification Branch, and they oversee all basically the ACS and all the other fun stuff about interpretations of it. And I got it's not a legal interpretation, but it's in writing from Certification Branch saying that referencing a legal interpretation that came out on the airplane side years ago about this same issue, because the airplanes have been required to have instrument training in private. And the question was, what equipment needs to be installed to train a pilot to reference the instruments in private? And the FAA said, for that case, you need to have a full panel, which is, I agree for that situation. They said, well, this is what the FAA says. Back then, this is applicable here. So in order to do a check ride, you need to have a full panel. And I was like, well, this is not the same because, in my personal opinion, it's one thing if you're going to train them for the first time, and yes, you don't want to train them for the first time, partial panel. But they've already done, most aviators go private, instrument, commercial, in the way the industry goes. They've done all their instrument training in instrument and an instrument ship, which has the full panel. And they have a VFR aircraft for the commercial. So it's not like you're training for the first time. They should be able to do this partial panel, and as long as they meet standards, they should be able to meet standards. If they can do it with a single attitude indicator, great. If they need to have two pieces, great. But as long as they have whatever they need to do to fly within standards, that's all really should matter. But the FAA said no. So unfortunately, because for me and my check rides, I can't speak for other DPs, I can't speak for other FSDOs, I can't speak for any of this stuff. All I know is that the FAA, I have in writing from the FAA that I need a full panel, a working full panel to do a commercial check ride. And that is really frustrating for me. Some flight schools have had to split the check rides. That's what I have in writing, so I can't differ from that. I can't speak to other DPs. It is frustrating. I bring this up the chain again, and in fact, I am trying to pen a legal interpretation from the FAA specifically about this issue, because I think it is split across the industry. I even went so far to call Tim Tucker, who was on the original board of the ACS, to talk about this. And yeah, they even brought this up apparently when this first came out, when they were first discussing this, the ACS, and the FAA was pushing on the full panel route back then. So I don't know what's going to go in favor of that. I know a lot of flight schools, they have single stuff, but my really concern is for the Schweitzer and the R22 flight schools. A lot of flight schools now, most of the check rides I do now are in the 44, not so much in the 22 anymore. So yeah, now again, I don't want to upset the apple cart. I don't want to tell you what your flight school is doing is incorrect. If your local FSDO has given you the authority, then that goes on them. Not anything here. I'm just saying, if I have to go to a check ride at your flight school, That's just what I need to see, unfortunately. And sometimes we've had to split check rides where we do the entire check ride except for those 2 instrument maneuvers, and then we go jump in the 44 and go do that for a 0.2 or 0.3. And it's very frustrating, but it is what it is when it comes to this stuff. And I'm trying to get better, proper clarification and not someone from an office somewhere that's never flown a helicopter. But that takes time. So I have a legal interpretation penned. I'm having some other people review it. I'm going to be sending that up to the FAA, hopefully sometime soon-ish. But again, most legal interpretations take a year to 2 years to get a response back from the FAA, if they even choose to actually respond to it. So I've been trying to get some more pressure, aka get some other people and their local FSDOs to apply pressure to get like kind of an industry to send it, but I haven't got a lot of people to put their name on it with me. So
That's what you and I
anyways,
did.
that's a longer topic. Yeah.
Yeah, we did bulk of the maneuvers in the 22 and then the last 0.2 or 0.4 or whatever it was in the 44.
Yeah. And trust me, it's very frustrating. And it said
Yeah.
a lot of the solution is though the single digital gauge that has everything as a full 6-pack as a backup instrument. I've seen them put them in 22s and they're not too heavy. It's just expensive. So a lot of the flight schools that were, I don't want to say good or bad, but I want to say that have or bigger flight schools that have a lot more resources.
Yeah.
They made these changes pretty early on. It's those mom and pop shops, those smaller flight schools where they don't have the capital to drop 15 grand on every single one of their 2022s. So yeah, there is that. All right. Okay, aircraft validation. Okay, yeah, some things, it's okay for some things to be broken in the aircraft to do a check ride in it. However, they need to be addressed in the proper way and it needs to still be functional and safe. What I mean by that, I'm not expecting R-22s to have an MEL. But if something's broken in your helicopter, it needs to be addressed appropriately. And one big piece of the check ride is how to deal with inoperative equipment. So it needs to be handled. I can't tell him. It's been quite a few times where I'm like, okay, looked at all the logbooks, looked at everything, and I usually follow up with, hey, is there anything else wrong or broken with the helicopter that I need to know about? And it's like, oh well, the the map light thing is broken off. And I'm like, okay, that's a really random example, but like, hey, what should you do with broken equipment? And then you see the instructor like get wide-eyed, like go walk out to the helicopter. Come on, guys. It's not rocket science. It's the regulations we're about to cover right here. Like, you should have at least taught them this. You should at least follow the rules. It's not hard to put a placard on stuff, guys. Like, oh my gosh. Same thing, check your registration. Registrations are easy to miss or go missing. That has happened to me. Thankfully, we were able to track it down on that stuff. And I said instrument check rides require more review. I covered that already in detail. That's what takes a lot of time to go through with it. All right. Some general check ride things. So the FAA has come out and said that digital charts for flight government pilot, etc., is acceptable. However, you have to make sure they're updated. So, John's done his head over there. Like, so, usually I'm like, oh, cool. Like, what are you using? You're going to have like for flight, government pilot, whatever, paper charts. Just like a paper charts, they had to be valid, right? Well, for flight, Garmin needs to be updated, therefore valid. So I'm like, all right, show me they're updated. And that serves two purposes for me. One, because I had to make sure they're valid and current. And two, it shows me that the applicant knows how to actually update his charts or knows where to look. Because unfortunately, going to the digital side of things makes it so much easier. However, a lot of pilots or student pilots don't know how to actually use ForeFlight. So I usually get this a lot out of them on the cross-country flight planning phases as well. But there's another piece to that because, older school guys here, when you went to a check ride, you had two things. Two things they had to make sure were updated. Right, you had your chart, and then you had your chart supplement guide. It used to be called the AFD, and then it's the chart supplement now. They got rid of the tabs at the back for whatever reason. Right? There's the two things you had to have with you. It had to be current and valid to take a Checkride. Well, we got digital. We talk about charts, but then the other thing is the chart supplement. Well, that information is updated in there, but that's also we kind of stopped teaching as the industry stopped kind of talking about what that whole book was for and what's in there, other than the airport facilities diagrams. But the other information is actually in other places in ForeFlight and etc. You can just pull up the actual digital version of that, which is something I'm like, cool. If I want to know about controlled firing areas in this area, where would I find this out? And they're like, note tabs? Right? I'm like, well, if you were to look at the chart supplement guide, it tells you a whole tab right there of controlled firing areas in the area, or other things like that. So that's where you had the old book. Back then, you could just flip right through it. It's like right here, and this is my, these are my terminal airspace routes, and these are my other things. It's all in that information in that booklet. Well, if you're going digital only, something too, make sure you're teaching your students to how to reference this information and why is it important. It's not hard to pull up on ForeFlight if you know where to look for it, but a lot of times people are just going to be like, I pull up the airport diagram right here. Yeah. To answer your question, no, I have not worked with Avere or Flight Plan Pro. I'll have to look into that. With it now, when it comes to approval, it just says digital charts. It doesn't say specifically approvals. It just makes sure you have to have a way to show that the charts themselves are current that they're referencing. A couple of the details on that one too. So yeah, the applicants should know how to actually use the digital, whatever they're using, know how to use it to get all that information that's required per the FAA, right? All available information for the flight. Well, we make sure you know that. All right. Again, I'm going to get into some opinion EFBs. Okay. So, no. Again, if digital charts are accepted, so is the digital flight plans, right? I'm not expecting you to have a ForeFlight subscription and then have a paper one over here, right? So you can use those things, but again, you have to know how to use them and how to amend them. That's two really important pieces here. So I've had people that have digital printouts of their their flight plans, and that's fine. But like, hey, what happens when the wind we just get updated winds? How are you gonna do that? And if they don't know how to do that, that's gonna be a thing. So if they have pre-made stuff, I'm gonna have them usually alter it somehow, either add a leg or move a waypoint, and that way they can do something on a line item, and that way I know they know how to do it. And that's how I know they know how to do it with it. Or when it comes to on the navigation part with the ForeFlight, when they're actually on the cross-country portion, there's still time, distance, heading, fuel. That's the stuff they're required. If they don't reference that or talk about it, that's not good. So also on this one, digital weight and balance products, again, are also acceptable. But again, you need to know how to use it and if the data is correct. So 2 stories on this one. One time I had somebody that came to a Checkride and presented what's it called? The Geronimo app from Tim Tucker, right? I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, okay, so that's your weight and balance. Hey, that tail number is wrong. Oh, well, that's just the default plan tail number. Okay. Well, show me your numbers. So this beautiful little app, so nice and perfect. However, they didn't bother to update the actual aircraft raw data numbers to match the aircraft. So that was an invalid weight and balance, right? And again, that one chalks up to more the instructor to allowing that and not catching that. And I've had another situation where someone had the beautiful weight and balance application and his iPad updated and then it didn't work for him. And so for whatever reason, so he's like, I swear I had one. It was right here. And I can't seem to open the app now. It won't let me open it. And I was like, okay. I honestly, genuinely believe you. I see that your iPad it wasn't iPad, it was Android. That's his problem. But anyways. So I was like, all right. Well, if you can produce to me, I'm going to go use the bathroom, grab a cup of coffee. If you can go produce to me using your tools available to you, aka your POH right in front of you, if you can give me a weight and balance by the time I come use the bathroom, have a cup of coffee, make a phone call, then we can continue on this check ride. And he was able to do that, right? Because again, he was able to do the old school paperweight. That shows way more mastery than the app. But long story short, again, other DPs out there, they're old school, and again, that's their opinion. I can't speak to that. I just know what's allowed. And so digital weight balance allowed. I'm going to ask them to move it around with it, make sure they know it, and also validate that data. So they have to know how to use those tools. I also want to point out, because my history, I actually failed my commercial check ride on a weight and balance error. So it was like a commercial check ride. He gave me this scenario. He's a photographer, and his camera bag was exactly 6 inches between his legs and the R22, and blah, 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 blah. And it weighed exactly 6.5 pounds, and blah, 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 all this crazy stuff. So I had an entire back sheet of all of my, weight and balance calculations on top of this thing here to do all this extra stuff that he added, right? And so we start the check ride. Check ride has begun. All right, show me your flight plan, your weight and balance. So I slide it over to him. He looks it over, and he goes, "What's a negative times a negative?" I'm like, "A positive." And he goes, "Why is this number negative? This is unsatisfactory. If we can continue on the other parts of the check ride, but this is still a failure for today. We can hit other topics on the oral portion only. That way you don't have to do less. You can do less when you come back." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" So on my weight and balance, on the removing the cyclic on the lateral CG, that 0.2 pounds, I did a negative times a negative, and I failed the check ride, which back then was PTS. So I'm really glad, I just want to point this out, that in the ACS, it says right here, I have it screenshotted. It's navigation. Hold on. Where's the weight and balance? It says correct for errors in the ACS. It says specifically that this applicant shall correct for weight and balance errors and ensure that they're within CG, which I'm like, I love they added in there, expecting there to be weight and balance errors with it. So, yeah, that was quite funny to me. All right, going on the check ride things. If you're going to digital, I see this a lot now. Some people, they show up with a straight line flight plan, right? Just like a single A to B point on there for flight or government pilot. I'm not going to consider that really acceptable for navigation on a check ride. Now, granted, I've done a lot of direct enter-enters myself, follow the purple line, because I know how commercial pilots fly. I've done that, right? And I can also say, as a commercial pilot, I have never done a paper flight plan, to go do a commercial flight. Never done one, because it's excessive and silly, right? I can still navigate appropriately without this stuff. That's why I personally don't harp on a lot of requiring paper and because I know how the industry works. I'd much rather want you to know how to use your GPS and know how to use applicable tools in case your GPS fails than how good you can plot with an E6B and paper. It doesn't make any sense. Like that's those are for, in my opinion, people that were stuck in flight schoolisms and need to get out in the real world and fly. Anyways, that's my opinion. But anyways, on this navigation piece, I have a little point in here. Correct for and record differences between pre-flight fuel, ground speed, and calculated calculations. Arrive at the waypoint and route checkpoint within 5 minutes of the initial or revised estimated time of arrival, and provide a destination estimate. And then altitude, 200 plus or minus 200 feet. So I put that out there. If they do a single line, well, guess what? I have to make sure that they hit their time, distance, and fuel. And their time within 5 minutes. That's a requirement in the skills element. So guess what? If all you do is put 1 point between the two of you're on your cross country, guess what? If I decide to allow that, I'm sitting along for a long flight with you. Right? So on the, again, preferred distances, again, I'm not a stickler. You must have this many. It's more about picking the waypoints that make the most sense for both pilotage and dead reckoning. But for the love of God, don't make them 20, 30 miles away, because that means I'm going to sit there with you and go 20, 30 miles away just for you to hit your first point, for you to tell me, okay, well, I planned on this many minutes and we're within this many minutes. That's all I need you to say. Right? So Again, preferred 5-10 miles, somewhere in that range, as long as there's thought out waypoints. That's really the key. Like, why are you picking that point? Oh, because I'm supposed to do every 5-10 miles. Well, if there's one that's like 12 miles away, but it's a wide open, visible spot, that makes more logical sense than anything else. But for the check ride purposes, just pick a waypoint, that's reasonable outside the pattern, reasonable, a couple miles away, 5-ish outside the pattern. That's going to get us hopefully in the direction of your practice areas that we can get the rest of the check ride done. So I'm just seeing that they were able to fly a heading, hold an altitude, and they're going to hit their time, distance, fuel, all that stuff within what they planned on. That's all I'm looking to check. And obviously make sure they don't get lost just doing that. And a lot of it's also on the helicopter side. A lot of it's just like cockpit management skills, especially in like the Robinsons. That's really, kind of looking for. All right. Other check ride things. Scenario-based training. So the FAA requires DPs to have the plan of action, as well as they're supposed to have a scenario. Now, most DPs out there consider a scenario just across country. Well, that's not exactly what the FAA intended. The older DPs didn't do it that way. Newer DPs are more pushing to scenario-based training. What I've seen, on my opinion, is what instructors need to teach more of, is that a lot of times people that know the information, but once I pose it to them in a scenario, they give me like the blue screen of death on their face. And I'm not going super crazy about it either. It's, pretty self-explanatory. Like, oh, well, for example, I could ask them, I could ask them all different, like, hey, tell me what, how'd you know you're getting into low G? And they're like, oh, well, I'm going to tell these things. I feel like my C, and the aircraft's going to roll to the right, blah, blah, blah. Cool. But if I were to pose to them the question of, okay, on your cross country, we're flying along, and insert reason, let's say we're wake turbulence or a thunderstorm gust front or whatever, insert reason, right? And you all of a sudden we feel turbulence, and you feel light in your seat, and the aircraft starts to roll rapidly to the right. What do? And I can't tell me how many applicants just look at me deadpan, and they're like, low rotor? And I'm like, okay, breathe. Let's diagnose again. We're flying, we feel light in your seat, and the aircraft, what is light in your seat? And then we're rolling to the right. Oh, okay, I know where we're going now. And they're able to spin up the thing. Well, as the instructors, no one's gonna pop up in the helicopter with you in flight and be like, hey, what are the reasons for suddenly with power? No one's gonna do that, right? You're gonna experience these symptoms, recognize it, right, and then have to function for it. And I get it; they're stressful. I'm asking a question that's new. I get that they're not going to be perfect on this, but just simply as the instructor, from when you're getting them ready for check rides, don't just ask them like, what are the indications of low G? Pose it to them like that in a scenario, and have them put that correlation of, okay, now, because that's what they're going to experience in the helicopter. That's the important piece there. So just kind of start to adopt scenario-based training. Especially my commercial scenarios, I take time on. For the people that have done check rides with me in North Carolina, they know this. I take time on commercial scenarios heavily to really dive into a real-world scenario for them as a new commercial pilot, where they have to learn or have to dig into the regulations about what they can and can't do. And, it's hard sometimes. They're like, oh, I just wouldn't do it. Nope. I'm going to be super safe. Just not going to do it. Nope, not going to fly. Very frustrated. Granted, I'm not out there to get you. I'm not going to give you a scenario that is making you not fly. I'm going to give you a scenario. I want you to give a scenario where you can figure out how to do it legally without stepping on any kind of landmines that are out there. And I'm very intentional about this, especially on the commercial, because unfortunately in this industry, I put it this way, the industry eats their own. They really target these flight schools, these new instructors, these new pilots. They really suffer until they get to those higher tier caliber jobs where they actually start seeing how things are supposed to be run. So as a new commercial pilot, and I can speak to my own experience when I was a brand new commercial pilot, there's a lot of things that I didn't know, and the owners of these places where I worked wanted to make a buck, and they were a little more on the gray area of regulations and willing to risk my certificate on doing stuff that I didn't know any better for. So I really try to pose those things and be like, hey, have the applicants make those decisions about what's legal or not, and knowing for certain what they can do. I know that I think on John's Checkride, I know he brought it up to the group, the scenario that I gave him, which was it was a decent one. I think it was an Easter egg drop one. I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So something that you could do as commercial work, which is also very unique on the helicopter side compared to the airplane side. The airplane side, they don't have a lot of things they can actually do under Part 91. Versus on the helicopter side, we have a lot more carve-outs to what we can do, which is why we should be testing it more and also posing those things more. All right. Written test. So, as you guys probably know this, but on the written test, I need to review. I usually try to review it prior to when I build my plan of action. But I am required to ask the applicant items that they got wrong on the written test. I have to. It's per my guidance. I have to. So if you're their CFI, guess what? You should probably hit on pretty heavily on the emphasis. And unfortunately, some of those topics are really random and stuff that I have to really try my hardest to incorporate. Or I'm like, hey, dude, that's really off left field, but tell me about because they got it wrong in the written test and we're required to cover it. There are some really random topics, but it also forces DPs to not do the same cookie cutter check rides every single time either. So there's a positive there. All right, check ride regulations. Just you can look up things on check rides depending on your DP and then what they'll allow. I generally, if it's a rule, again, you don't have to memorize everything. You have it there on your phone. Wherever you're gonna be flying around, you're gonna have references of some sort within reason. Now, if it's something that's required for safety, for example, airspace cloud clearances, you don't have time to look that up. Or maybe Lycan signals, you don't really have time to look that up. But if it's talking about something really arbitrary, we're gonna go down in the weeds about when exactly is nighttime or something like that, absolutely you can look that up. You should generally have a general idea of what the regulations say, so you're compliant. But as I said this to multiple people, no one's out there is going to pop out of a bush and be like, what's 91205? It's no one's going to do that. It's when you're out there and you find something that's broken, you're like, ooh, can I fly with this? I feel safe about it. I can placard that. Oh, wait a minute. I don't know if I can. Let me look that up. That should be that indication to you. Wait a minute. I need to check this. So, anyways, you can look things up. I will encourage, though, that to your students and so that the tabs are cool and nice, but they don't always work in your benefit when all you can see is tabs and they're just flipping through it wildly. They have to know where to look. I'd much rather encourage CFIs to teach your students about the regulations and how they're written, how they're organized, and that will be so much more beneficial to them where to find things. So I have this picture right here, right? Part 61. Part 61, you have all your subparts. So you have your subpart A, B, and then all the way down D, E, F, and G, right? So if it's a topic of question of, medical duration, or do you need a flight review, or anything like that, right? That's going to be in part 61. Under what part? I don't know, subpart A. There's only 60 rules there, so it's a lot less to dig through. So at least teach your students how to be aware of that. For aircraft ratings and authorizations, that's your 61 through 77. So there's all that stuff. All right. So same thing on 91. 91, there's subpart, basically A, B, A and B, which is really 200 rules, but it's actually a lot less than that. And then under flight rules, subpart B, there's VFR and IFR. There's actually only 16 IFR rules under Part 91. Under that section, now obviously there's additional rules on equipment and stuff like that, but there's only 16 rules. So when you start realizing this, you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's only 16 rules. I have to know where they're at. It becomes really easy to find an instrument check ride or even a VFR check ride. So knowing how the rules are constructed is going to help them know where to look when they need to find this stuff. If it's equipment, it's going to be 91 and it's going to be towards the back in the 200s because it's after the general rules. Yes. Or if it's an inspection requirement, that's going to be somewhere in the 400s. Yes, like that's going to help them find it so much quicker. That's what you can do to benefit your students, especially against scores like the commercial and eventually CFI. All right, question on CFI check rides. FOI cheat sheet. Okay. So on a CFI check ride, you're allowed to use references and it's instructional knowledge of. So, but it's also has to be a practical understanding of how to use that. So when it comes to FOI, and again, it's all circumstantial based, and I have to read how they're looking at it, right? So if they are reading off the FOI and giving me a rote level answer, that's a problem. Because again, they're actually supposed to have instructional knowledge of. So they actually have to be able to teach me how to how to apply this stuff. Now also, FOI is fundamentals of instruction. It is not fundamentals of aviation instruction. It's fundamentals of instruction, period. So whether you learn how to teach aviation or you learn how to teach Sunday school, the same principles apply. So that's really when I know when I'm teaching CFI applicants or also when I'm evaluating them, I very often tell them, I'm like, hey, that's all cool and dandy. Give me all these aviation examples. Give me a non-aviation example about that thing. About primacy, wherever it's going to be, right? Tell me a non-aviation example about that. Like, oh, well, I touched the stove and or whatever, right? That could be more experience. But anyways, but that's kind of how I go on the FOI side. So if it's just a cheat sheet of like to remember what those terms are for like their acronyms, fine. Like I don't care. They have to explain it to me. Now, if they're literally reading out of the book, that's a problem. Now they're allowed to reference the book and get prepared for that. But again, if that's all they're doing read off it, that's not demonstrating instructional knowledge of. So does that answer hopefully that answers your question on that topic. It's circumstantial. All right, ACS standards. Yeah, so many times where I'm like, hey, are you familiar with the ACS? And they're like, oh yeah, okay. And then later on, especially it's always difficult after things don't go well. When I have to reference the standards, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem or whatever. Your students should at least be aware of the ACS. Now, this is another question for you CFIs or people getting ready to get into the CFI. When do you introduce the ACS and the standards to the student? When should you?
I've heard a couple conflicting, or just there's a variety of opinions on this. I think as a student, I would have benefited from it earlier on than later. But I have heard the opposite. Like you should teach them everything and then plop the ACS on them. And oh, by the way, these are the standards you're going to be tested to. But it's been taught like, hey, this is your standards. These are why we're training the way we are training. And I kind of like that method. That would have benefited me. I didn't really get that until later on in my training.
I think you treat it like a syllabus, like for any course you've ever taken in your life. I mean, the ACS is essentially a syllabus for what you're guided to learn. Now, whether you understand it as an entry-level student or not, I mean, you take a college class, I mean, you're given a syllabus on the first day and a rubric saying, hey, this is what you're responsible for.
Yeah, like a syllabus. Yeah, that's logical for me.
So that's a loaded question, and I asked it like that on purpose to get some discussion on it. Yeah, so to be more technically accurate is when do you hold them to the standards? When they're meeting the standards. You can use that teaching tool, and typically when you're introducing the maneuver, you generally want to show them, like, at least tell them the first time what the standards are, but you don't want to harp on the standards the very first day, because it's only going to defeat them and make them feel bad, right? Because they're not meeting standards first day. It's going to take them time to build towards it. Now, some on a flight school side of things, if they're a 141 school, a lot of times the syllabi will have like the standards that are really, really egregious, and they get tighter until they meet standards towards the end of the syllabus. That's fine. That's totally fine. But generally, yes, the ACS is more towards when you're getting ready to be evaluated, either before a stage check or, for the check ride is when that's when you're actually holding them to the standards. And when you're debriefing with them, getting that ready for the check ride, and you're like, hey man, like that met standards, that was great, you met all these things, it was within 100 feet, or when they don't, when they're getting ready for that, they're shaking the rest off, cleaning up for check ride, that's where you're like, hey, use the standards to show them what they need to attain at that point. That's towards the end of the thing. Obviously, you should introduce the standards to them in the very beginning when you're demonstrating the maneuver, but you're not holding them to the standards until they're ready towards the end. But definitely not the day before the check ride. That's why I bring that up. But it used to be an old joke back in the day when things were paper, when you're like, they show up to the check ride with the PTS still in the plastic sheath, that they bought it at. With that nowadays, I mean, if a lot of the stuff is digital. If you're going to use digital, again, know where to find it, know where to reference it. With that, and also just as you CFIs, the ACS doesn't really change much, but there are some updates, so make sure that you've actually, they have the most current version, especially when it comes to the PTS. That's more of like an double-I check ride stuff, because they'll have the old one that's been on the shelf for 10 years, and they don't have the updated one. But again, that's a do you know where to find it question, and as long as they know where to find it and they understand the rest of the guidance, then it's okay by me, at least say. And they can pen and ink that stuff if they need to, the changes. All right, safety of flight items in the ACS. I'm sure you guys have seen this stuff. So if you read through the very back table, demonstration of slopes is 5 to 10 degrees unless there's a published limit. Now, caveat, go read the actual verbiage. It says that basically slope limits can be demonstrated up to the slope limits of the aircraft. If there are no published slope limits, then they may be demonstrated between 5 to 10 degrees. Why did I bring this up? A lot of flight schools, especially very risk-averse flight schools, have these little dedicated areas on slopes, and sometimes those slopes are maybe 3 degrees. They're like a so you want to be able to have that the proper point of the maneuver, right, is to be able to have that locking in that 2 points of contact and actually having the helicopter controlled set down. If it's such a slight slope where they can inadvertently fall into it and be like, oh, slope, that defeats the purpose of the maneuver. The ACS, they actually describe that. And the old back in the PTS days, they're like, oh, well, as long as, the one skid's lower than the other, that's a slope, right? That counts. It's kind of slopey. I've heard that term before. The AC actually addresses that. If there's no published limit, it's supposed to be between 5 to 10 degrees. If there's an attitude indicator in there, okay, well, it kind of goes off the examiner's feel on that one. Straight-in autos. All right, straight-in auto, you have to have a minimum of 500 feet. AGL, minimum altitude for the straight auto, okay? And somehow, at so many flight schools I go to, they are still doing the autos at 500 feet. And you can go higher. There's nothing that says you can't go higher than that. And it's funny because you'll have these discussions. I have these discussions with guys on the navigation portion, like, oh, well, why'd you choose to go to 1,500 on your cross country? Oh, well, just safety in case they do an auto and wires and airplanes and da-da-da-da. All right, cool. Well, why are we doing a 500 feet for the auto? Well, that's what my instructor told me to do. Well, what altitude you're planning on flying at? 1,500? So then why don't you do it at 1,500 then? Please don't change your flow on a check ride day, but you got to talk to your instructor about that. Long story short, though, if all you're doing is at 500 feet, and because every student is always perfect on their altitude all the time, right? They never dip below right before they enter the auto, right? If you're doing all your autos at 500 feet, exactly at 500 feet, and you're setting your students up for failure, and also, go up higher. It gives you more time to respond, more time to, adjust things on that auto. And yes, you absolutely can adjust stuff in a straight-in. You absolutely can. There's this adage like, oh, you enter the straight-in, wherever you enter is where you end up. I'm like, no, you can do so much in 500 feet. So much you can do in 500 feet. Alongside of that. All right, 700 feet minimum for autos with turns. That's fine. Industry average, 700, 800 feet for 180 autos. Pretty normal. Again, you can go higher. And unfortunately now, with the ACS implementation now, they said that the turn must be complete by 300 feet. Now, when I went to training, it was a 200-foot check, and turn complete by 200 feet. It was on a standard, and 200 feet, I was at high DA. So I was an R22 at 5,000 feet field elevation. The DA those days were like 8,000 to 9,000 feet. yes, it was really imperative that we got things under control before we finished that auto. But at sea level, when I was teaching at sea level, like it was a 100-foot check because I get turned complete by 100 feet. That was more than fine. Someone really went above and beyond with the 300 feet thing, in my opinion. However, that is now a standard. They have to have the turn completed by 300 feet. That is quite difficult on the private level if you do what we've been doing with the 180 autos. And it's not intentional. They're just like doing the turn. And how we normally teach in 180 autos doing that turn, they're usually finishing the turn just naturally in the apex of it is somewhere usually around 250 feet. That's just generally what I've seen watching most pilots and students flying and training. It's around that 250 mark. So you have to up higher than that. It ends up being this like weird turn, and then we're waiting for the straight in piece to come into play. Long story short, if you're gonna do the 180 auto, you're gonna go up higher. You have to go up higher in the altitude to get that extra rollout altitude, which is kind of what they intended to do. Now, unfortunately, though, on the negative side of things, I've seen a lot more flight schools now not teaching 180 autos to the degree what they should be doing because they're like, you're not gonna do it on a check ride. Because I give people the option, like, hey, do you want to do a straight in or 180? And everybody, and I mean every single applicant is doing straight-ins. And unfortunately, I've heard some rumor mills behind the thing that they started not even teaching 180 autos, like properly really doing them very much at all now. And I'm like, well, guess what I'm going to be doing when I go back to that flight school? We're going to do the 180 auto. I'm not going to give them a choice anymore. And that's going to have, unfortunately, force the behavior for them to do that. But long story short, guys, because of this, make sure you give them more altitude. More altitude gives you more time and more time to be able to do that. To ask the AGL monitoring, yes, I'm getting a reference on it, and it's the altimeter unless they have rad out. But even still, the rad outs in a turn is actually not accurate. So really, your more accurate instrument is going to be your altimeter for that. And that being said, like, am I going to be a really, really absolute, like, complete, like, oh, well, you have to be completely dialed in? And they didn't say turn complete. What does turn complete mean? Does it mean, like, the last, like, 30 degrees? Or do you have to be dead nut center? There's no guidance on that. That's up to the interpretation of the examiner and the instructor about what it means by turn complete, along that side of things, too. That's... They added a lot of interesting issues when they added this to the ACS. Another point to note here, lower RPM cannot be done during the critical phase of flight. That includes takeoff and landing. They put that in the ACS. I actually agree with that. A lot of old school adages, it was the old school, like that happened to me, was like, hey, do your low rotor RPM, or governor off approach and low rotor RPM recovery at the same time, and we're going to do that, going into land on the taxiway, right? It's real world, right? Make sure you can do a full pattern and approach governor off. Well, now, no, they said no. So it's going to be in a route portion or route phase of flight alongside that to do that. All right. And op equipment. Okay, so it goes back to here. I'm going into individual topics that I see that I've run into issues with to make sure it's covered. All right, so in the ACS, this is I took from the commercial, but private is pretty much worded the same. So right here, one of the very first tasks is pre-flight preparation, right? So just going to point this out here. Platform maintenance, equipment requirements for day and night VFR, flying with an operative equipment, use an approved MEL list, KOEL list, and required discrepancy records or placards. Oh, surprise, placard. Special area certificate limitations, risk management, inoperative equipment discovered prior to flight. And then in the skills section, locate and determine airworthiness certificate registration, determine helicopter airworthy, and then apply appropriate procedures for operating with inoperative equipment in the scenario given by the evaluator. Guess what? You can be certain your student is going to be asked on a check ride how to deal with inoperative equipment, and it blows my mind how many applicants completely stumble through this process. And I'm like, it's right there. It's one of the things that they're going to have to be asked on. It even says that, like, in a scenario given by the examiner, like, I literally have to ask them how to deal with inoperative equipment in a scenario. It's going to be on there. It has to be per the ACS. So they need to make sure they understand what to do with inoperative equipment. I get it. I try to avoid going down the rabbit hole into all this crazy complicated MEL stuff, which, to be honest, how we teach MELs is way more complicated than how you actually use them in real life. I have written MELs, got them approved by the FAA. I've used plenty of MELs across the industry. They're super simple, straightforward, easy to use. Now, we're getting them approved by the FAA, different story. But on the training side, we go in because I think it's really because most of the flight schools never used them before, and it really creates this bit of a confusion. But the typical operator 91 with an operative equipment, so many people get this, they stumble through this, and it's such a hard time for them to figure it out. It's really, really simple. Either you remove it or you disable it and placard it. It's really all you have to do, and we boil it down to it. And so many applicants I've run into just stumble through this horribly. And there's been some unsats with this topic too. So something that you can do better on as you teach your students. Make sure they know how to do this stuff. And it's right there. It's very clear they have to be asked this. It's not a random chance. They may or may not ask this. They're gonna have to ask them this. All right. Aircraft performance, which always kind of makes me chuckle because they says aircraft performance, and some of this stuff is performance, but when you actually look at under skills element, what are they actually referencing? It's going to be weight and balance on this topic. But going through with it though, this is the one part with compared to the PTS, the ACS, thing I don't really like is that the only really place that we're talking about aerodynamics, unless we're talking about the emergencies, helicopter hazards, is here. And so you see here the IFK4 aerodynamics, as well as going to the HV diagram. So I can't speak for other DPs, but I typically we're talking about altitudes on the cross country. I'm like, cool, why did you pick this altitude? And almost everyone says, altitude for an auto. I'm like, cool. Then I'm like, is there any minimum altitudes that we need to comply with? Or what's the lowest you can go down to? And then we talk about the rule about minimum altitudes for helicopters. And then I'm like, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? And then they usually leads into the HV diagram. And having the students understand, or the applicants, understand what the purpose of the HV diagram is and pointing those parts out. And guess what? That is a chart. So if I want to do bare minimum Checkride, that covers that chart piece here, and then we just have to cover some weight and balance items. It's really easy to hit these topics pretty dang quick if they're on board with it. But dive into aerodynamics though. Another thing on this performance chart is using other performance charts. And typically for the train helicopters, it's going to be basically in ground effect or out of ground effect hover charts. So make sure they know how to use those, referencing it up, show us we have performance to do this flight based on our cross country. Pretty easy to do that. But this is where I've run into some issues across the industry and talking about ground effect. When the FAA rewrote the helicopter flying handbook, this latest edition, in the diagrams, they added in extra pieces for pressures. And I think that's the origin of some of this. And unfortunately, I've seen this quite a bit where like, all right, cool. You have ground effect, out of ground effect, and you'll see the differences are like thousands of feet. And I'm like, oh, so, why are these so different on the chart? Oh, well, because of ground effect. Cool. Explain what ground effect is. And you'll get the airplane answer. Oh, it's a cushion of air. You're like, okay. What do you mean a cushion of air? And then it usually unravels pretty fast from that. Which is really, if they're able to give a concise answer like, oh, ground effect is the increase of rotor efficiency when within usually about the rotor diameter of the ground. This is because the airflow being pushed out reduces the vortices and your induced flow decreases. And therefore your angle of attack increases and you get more efficient. Something like that, a very easy answer. But it's also very technical, but also it shows a lot of understanding. It can even be less than that. But most of the time I get these answers are like, it's a cushion of air. And when I ask them, okay, well, how does that work? It usually starts to digress pretty quickly. And I think, honestly, I've seen a lot of this new thing now where they're talking about velocity and air pressure. They're like, oh, well, it's a cushion of air because it's increasing the pressure beneath it. And a lot of new pilots I've seen are losing the significant, yes, that diagram right there. So the older diagrams didn't have that pressure velocity element to it, which I think is confusing them, which I get it says that, but what the important emphasis here is about the angle of attack and the efficiency. So the lack of induced flow, therefore lack of induced drag, and therefore increase of angle attack for the same angle of incidence. Like that is the increase in performance. And it's since 1960s, the helicopter handbooks all have referenced this. And then now they added this in there, which is, I think, is causing some confusion because this has literally been something I've seen only in the past couple of years now. Maybe the flight schools I'm going to, I don't know, but I've always heard the cushion of air thing coming from the airplane side. But it's this pressure argument they're coming from, as opposed to just like, hey, it's about the angle of attack and the induced flow. Like that is the important element. And to be honest, I could talk. Yes, the helicopter flight handbook. There's so many rants on this one. I could have a whole topic on here about aerodynamics, and some of the things here that are just there's a lack of practical understanding about aerodynamics out here in the industry a lot. That I wish students knew. But what makes a helicopter is boiled down to most aerodynamic factors. It has to do with the amount of inflow, therefore induced flow. And when you flip it and put it the other way, that's the inflow for auto rotation, and that's what makes auto rotation. When the student understands the relationship between the vertical and the horizontal airflow, everything else aerodynamically can pretty much be explained, except for a few individual little topics. But aerodynamically, what's going on in the airfoil, when they understand that process, everything else follows through with it, and it makes it very easy for the student or the applicant to understand. That's one more thing that I usually see on the CFI Checkride process. Is I definitely have them explain aerodynamics and diagrams, basically from first pickup to a hover all the way through exceedance of VNE aerodynamically what's going on, and you'd be surprised how quickly you can do that. But also just understanding the application of it all. One little gotcha on check rides, shallow approach to running landing. I want to point out to this element right here, S6, maintains effective transitional lift across the surface, transitional lift during surface contact with landing gear parallel to ground track. So, I get it, and on the training side, I've trained many people to be able to fly the helicopter to a hover instead of down. And in fact, it was a requirement in the Gulf of Mexico when I was a check airman in the 407. When they're going to toadstools, they're 18 feet by 18 feet. They'll postage stamp out in the ocean. They had a hydraulics failure, and that's the only place to land. You couldn't do a running landing. You had to bring to a hover instead of down. So we actually trained our people in the 407 to be able to bring to a hover instead of down with minimal drift. So it's doable in bigger helicopters as well as smaller helicopters, and I understand instructors teaching their students this. However, on the check ride for the ACS, in the certificate, it does say they have to maintain ETL during service contact, which might be a little faster than what they've been training. I just want to point that out. Now, there's a lot of interpretation about how do you know you're through ETL, and please, for the love of God, don't have your students go 30 knots. Gosh, no, don't do that. $7,000 DA with zero. All right, so question here: if it's 7,000 DA with zero wind, allow them to modify that slightly as part of risk management, make a touchdown slightly slower, riding vibrations of transverse flow effect. So there are some tolerances in the ACS, especially when it comes to decision making, and also, yeah, they brief it and why they're doing it that way. I guess that's a little bit deeper topic. I would really want to have a conversation with them about like why, if there's zero wind, why they want to go slower, than just maintain ETL. That's a little bit. Yeah, ground speed can be pretty fast. Yeah, if it's a wear and tear on the ship argument, it would have to be a bigger conversation. If they're making good decisions or risk management, there is some leeway on the standards. I mean, it also depends on how slow they're talking, right? And also, how do you know what is ground? How do you know you've been through ETL, effectively? That's a lot of discussion. I know there's the trim string argument comes up and other things, but yeah, that one's up for interpretation. Just like angles on approaches. Like, unless you're out there with the protractor, how do you know what 15 degrees or 10 degrees or 5 degrees is? Like, it's up to your interpretation. And if there's not a visible indicator of wind, how do you know if you've been through ET? I mean, the helicopter kind of tells you there's some indications, but when you're that close to the ground and you're getting ground effect interrupting with that, it's kind of hard to tell. Sometimes if it's a really calm day in that situation. Anti-torque system failures. This is another common industry. I would put weak area that I've seen, and this just also comes from my optics, having taught stuck pedals, taught tail rotor failures, and teaching these. However, the industry kind of stopped teaching these unless you're going to do it on the advanced side. It's oral only. Well, unfortunately, it's almost become this like lost understanding on the primary level about how to understand when it comes to stuck pedals. Tail rotor failures are pretty easy, right there. Follow the RFM. But having your students understand, and honestly, the hard part with stuck pedal too, and across all the different airframes I've flown, the silly part is that if you talk to OEM instructors across, Sikorsky, Airbus, Bell, they all have their own ways of dealing with a stuck pedal or pedal malfunction, and the crazy part is they all work. They're all slightly different, but they all work specifically for that helicopter. For the stuck pedal piece. So that's the interesting part. But again, going back to for the Checkride level here, the helicopter flying handbook describes the procedures generally pretty rudimentarily, and as long as the student has that understanding about the torque and anti-torque relationship, and it's something as simple as, like, in my opinion, again, reading through this, like, okay, if you're at a stuck pedal, and we can give them a scenario where they figure out a stuck left pedal. For time's sake, I'm not going to give the whole thing, but give a scenario where they have to figure out that they have a stuck left pedal. If they're able to tell me, okay, I'm going to do a kind of a higher power approach, probably a steeper approach, vertical if necessary, and then it depends if I can run it on or not, or I might be able to do, like a reduced power, use my throttle at the very bottom. That's a great answer, right? Or if it's stuck right pedal, hey, I'm going to figure it out, and going to try to do a running landing or a low power approach. That's the appropriate answer. Now, if you want to get specifics into the specific aircraft that you're flying, that's fine too. But unfortunately, even on the commercial, like when I was doing 135 check rides, I've had 135 check ride failures on the oral portion of this same thing. Experienced commercial aviators still cannot figure out how to deal with stuck pedals. And I know it's confusing with the opposites of torque and anti-torque, but I see it a lot. Yes. So, and I have heard the argument that, there is no references in the RF or POH for the R22 or R44. But again, the helicopter flying handbook, the FAA, handbook describes these things, and that would be your go-to to how to teach this for those students. And again, I'm not asking they shouldn't be asking way into the weeds in this stuff. It's just a general answer, like, hey, if you have a stuck left or right pedal, what kind of approach should you do? That's really all the answer that they're looking for on some of this stuff. And that's if they even bother to go down that hole, like going down that track. Because again, it could be a failure. So it's like, oh, you have a tail rotor failure in flight or in a hover. What do you do? And that could be suffice as well. But stuck pedal, yeah. Very excellent. There are different techniques. I saw you guys had that video of the 407. There was some discussion on it. I used to teach stuck pedal in the 407 specifically, as well as other aircraft. You are able to have some throttle manipulation on that one, but the 407 is actually fairly straightforward on the approach procedures for it. But that can be a different conversation, different time. How to actually do that. Well, Well, the 505 that I fly for the PD is also and yes, even though it's a dual FADEC, it's not just flight or idle. If it's a 407 GXI, it's not one or the other. They still have modulated throttle control. All 407s have modulated throttle control. Unless you're talking about like an Eagle HP. Sorry, I'm talking to the notes here. Saying it was a dual FADEC flight or idle makes it harder. But on the stuck pedal side of things, even the 505 has a switch, and there is techniques involved in that, how to deal with stuck pedal when all you have is the switch. There's a couple little tips and things you can do to help out with that. One is the pumping method. You can do in like the 505, or if you don't have throttle manipulation. It's also about the approach profile, and it's really, and it comes to pedal. It's all about the relationship between your anti-torque and your torque, aka what power setting you have. And remember, when it comes to the power curve, right? There's the fast side and there's the slow side, or the back side and the front side. When you understand those and those relate, you get a little bit more options on that. But again, that's a way longer discussion. That's more on the teaching side of things. But jumping into, huge gripe. Get rid of helicopter flying handbook. It's all about money. The FA, to maintain a textbook, a handbook like that, they're like, wait a minute, all these topics are already repeated. And that's why. And I kind of agree that there's some things that are different, but there's not a lot of extra that's not already in the helicopter flying handbook already. So that's why they decided to get rid of it for the instructor handbook for helicopters. All right. Equipment system malfunctions. Pretty straightforward on some of these. When it comes to this one, though, this is something I see a lot of, especially on the news side, on the private level. Not so much on commercial. I have seen on commercial too. And that's where, if I were to give them some kind of system equipment malfunction and their default answer is, I just enter an auto. And I'm like, that is not an acceptable answer. I'm sorry. Just because of especially in ones where the aircraft is, still flyable. That is one where, that's not an acceptable answer. And it's just an emphasis on the industry about teaching the student you're learning, right? It's like auto. The thing is, we kind of forget as the industry to teach the students how to troubleshoot and verify the failures. And to be honest, based on the track record of doing auto rotations, and their track rate, it's not going to go too well for them. If they just intentionally enter an auto for a silly malfunction. So emphasize to your students the importance of knowing what lands is practical versus land immediately versus, or as soon as possible in a certain aircraft. Understanding really the how and the why and when to do those things. And the other piece and caveat to this too, it's also we'll talk Robinson here, because most of the training side of things. Per Robinson, land immediately. What is the procedure for land immediately? Open up a discussion. I'll jump at once.
I think you and I had this conversation. And it's find a suitable place that's safe and put the helicopter down.
Yeah, so the nearest suitable area and land the helicopter, and be prepared or be ready to enter an auto rotation.
Be ready to enter
right?
auto. Yeah.
Okay. What does that mean? Be prepared to enter an auto. Like, what does that actually mean? A lot of times I'll have the students like, well, I'm just going to be ready, like anticipating it to fail. I'm going to be ready to get the collective down. I'm like, well, aren't you doing that all the time anyways? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, so then how are you being ready to enter the auto? And I think it's the important thing is we're not in the industry, like they kind of left that piece out. And the important thing is that you want to pick a spot to land, get to that spot. So you should be descending, right? And how are you ready for how are you prepared for the auto rotation? You need to have the energy for the auto rotation, right? What does that mean? So you want to have a low pitch, you want to be descending, you want to be going down because you want to get to the ground as soon as possible, right? So you don't want to be pulling high amount of power, and you want to be holding an airspeed that's conducive to an auto rotation. So that doesn't mean dive the aircraft down to land it. You want to be keeping it at a profile that's somewhere about an automotive profile. So somewhere in that 60 to 70 knots, somewhere in that range. It can go a little faster, but somewhere in that range, low pitch setting, finding a spot that you can both glide to and, near, if you can, obviously some places out in the woods, you can't always make it there. You have to have a little bit of hope in your machine. But for the most part, picking a spot that you can glide to and maintaining the energy for an auto rotation. And that's the key there, because if you're expected to fail, if you guys ever taught, everyone showed you an engine failure at a high power setting or an engine failure versus a low power setting? Like, has anyone ever demonstrated this to you guys, your instructors, or do you guys ever teach this to students?
I've done this for CFI training.
Yes, I know you have, Matt. I did it with you. All right, so without taking my own note here, from your perspective, Matt, from a simulated engine failure from a high power setting versus a low power setting, how different is that?
They're drastically different.
Drastically different, yeah. The amount of rotor RPM decay is so significant by only a few inches of manifold pressure. Only a few inches of manifold pressure difference is a humongous change in rotor RPM and the amount of decay that happens. So again, setting your student up for success here, how are they ready for land immediately? They were expecting this engine to fail, right? You want to be at a low power setting, not totally in auto rotation yet, unless there's a reason for it, right? And holding an airspeed and energy involved in it that's conducive to an auto rotation. And that's the important piece. And I think a lot of just instructors miss this. The other piece too, this is a hard part of my part, because I get guys that are like, I'll give them a Checkride. I'll give them, and I'm going to put it really quick here on the lesson plan. Guys, if you haven't been taught how to do that, energy management, don't just go up with your student tomorrow and go to max performance takeoff and drop throttle. Please do not do that. There's a whole way to introduce it. There's a whole way to teach it. If you haven't been taught how to do that, please don't just jump out and do that. There's a couple of CYA things in terms of safety I got to point out to this, especially in Robinson's. On some of that. But what was I saying? The energy management, be ready for the auto rotation. Oh yeah, for example, like hey, you have a oil light, right? So hey, you have an oil light. Come on, what is the procedure? First, I'm gonna ask them orally, what's the procedure? And they're like, oh, it's gonna be land immediately, ready for auto rotation. Okay, great. Show me. And I've seen this craziest stuff from applicants when I ask them to show me what land immediately is. I've seen guys dive the helicopter in R-22 or R-44 going 110 knots, screaming to the ground. I've seen guys that will just enter an auto, like enter completely, and I'm like, why'd you enter that auto? Oh, that's my church told me to enter an auto. And I've had probably the maneuver that I've had the most failures on is the single engine failure and kind of this one. They kind of go hand in hand a little bit, because usually how I lead into it, engines rarely just go boom, quit. They usually have some kind of indicators, usually indicators. So I try to set the applicants up for success. So I'm like, hey, you have this failure that's a land immediately. You should be ready for the auto rotation. Guess what's probably going to happen next? And they should be ready for it. Yet somehow that does not work for them all the time. And I've seen all kinds of crazy stuff where I have to intervene and stop a rotor RPM exceedances or things like that on Checkrides from this maneuver specifically. So those two elements, though, is that, yeah, what does land immediately actually mean? How to set them up for it's conducive for the maneuver, right? And then same thing, too, like just don't have them enter an auto for a silly failure. I do auto rotations for a living. I've done thousands of touchdown auto rotations across all different helicopters I've flown, day, night, NVG, in the rain, you name it, I've done auto rotations in it. And I still would not want to do just an auto rotation as a precaution. If my engine's somewhat running, I'm going to keep it running all the way to the ground. Because I know what it's like to do those pull downs. And so I have a guy with 55 hours tell me that he's just going to do an auto to the ground because it's more safe than trying, just keeping a profile. Like, no, that doesn't make, no, that's a horrible decision. I'm sorry. So anyways, alongside of that, as of for me, again, this is my asking the question, EPs, do you like to do in flight? So when I do EPs, I will brief this on my Checkride briefing. I'm like, hey, some stuff I will, I'm going to like ask you, hey, if this light were on, what would you do? If I'm asking you a question, I'm expecting a verbal answer, right? Then I might ask you to demonstrate or show me or anything like that first. And that could be as simple as hydraulic failure. Hey, if you're an hydraulic failure, what would you do? And I might do that on the oral portion, and then we'll do it in the flight portion, or if we're in flight. It all depends on the aircraft that I fly and the emergency I'm trying to do. Yes, my pull circuit breakers, not normally. Sometimes, depends on the aircraft, especially instrument rides, to get the partial panel piece, I might have to pull circuit breaker to get the glass cockpit, do what I want. But it depends on the aircraft. Again, I do check rides across a huge variety of them when it comes to that one. To ask again, how do I do simulation failure? On a check ride, this is also what I brief on the check ride, is that, hey, I'm going to tell you, simulate engine failure, and somewhere in the second or third announcement, I'm going to roll that throttle back, and it's your job to get the aircraft established in the auto rotation, turn towards a good spot, maneuver to get there, and make a mayday call if applicable if you have the time to do it. Right? I don't, commercial, it's more of a, also, again, I usually try to preload them on a scenario where they're ready for the auto rotation. So a lot of times if they're already in a profile land immediately situation, like I usually do cascade failure, like, hey, you have an oil light, what do you do? All right, hey, if this light were to be on right now, what's the procedure? Oh, it's oil light. I'm gonna land immediately. Okay, show me. And then they get set up for the profile. And then it's simulation failure. They're usually gonna get it down pretty quickly. But in terms of if I tell them once and they react quickly, the moment they start moving that collective, I'm rolling that throttle down. Now, if there's a little bit of delay and whatever, I'm like, hey, simulate engine failure. And that's where I'm gonna be rolling that thing back, whether they're ready for it or not. And then we're along for the ride. Obviously, I'm there for safety, and I'm not going to let them do anything that's unsafe. And again, it also goes back to how the CFIs have taught and prepared that student. Because if all they taught them was in the pattern how to teach a simulated engine failure, you're just doing an auto. It's just like an auto. That's all it is. Well, no. In fact, I've actually had commercial pilots when I got them in 135 training, where I was like, all right, let's do like an engine failure, and we're doing autos in the 407, which in turbines you usually want to roll the throttle off before you lower the collective. It's not like the recips, because you're gonna have turbine over exceedances, so you're gonna roll the throttle off first. And there's a lot more inertia on those blades, anyways. I remember I roll that throttle off, and the guy's like doing the slowest, okay, and down, collect. Meanwhile, the RPM's taking, even in a 407, and I'm like, whoa, dude, and I'm correcting. I was like, what was that? He's like, that's how I was taught to do it. I'm like, what do you mean that's how you're taught to do it? He's like, my instructor told me do everything gentle and slow. And I'm like, you're going to lose so much rotor RPM, dude. There's a time and a place to be aggressive, and this is one of them. Like, you need to be aggressive with getting that collective down, with it. So, back to, there's a difference between check rides and training. We can have a train discussion, but I think the industry, though, when they get towards the end, obviously don't introduce them like throttle chops, but you should be able to get to the end of their train, both in private and especially in commercial, to where you should be able to simulate engine failure and get that throttle off. It's not directly a full-blown chop, but it's a rapid roll-off, and they can be able, they need to see the RPM decay, because that's part of the maneuver. Because in the pattern, or entrance performance maneuver, right? So down, right, after, off throttle. They're usually getting that throttle off once they lower the collective. Your RPM decay is nominal. There's very little fluctuation on it. Versus training a simulated engine failure, you want to get that RPM decay. Now, obviously, for safety and also reintroduction, you don't teach them throttle chops from day one. And it's generally towards the end where you're getting them to do that. And also, a great learning experience is when you're in the pattern training auto rotations and the student inadvertently chops the throttle on themselves. That is a great teaching tool. Do not let that moment escape them. Let them work through it. And then when you're back on the maneuvers completed, sit down the helicopter and be like, let's talk about what happened. What did you notice? You noticed that the yaw to the right really rapidly and you lost a bunch of rotor RPM and you're chasing it all over the place. And they're like, yeah, you chopped it on yourself. That's what it's going to look like if you were to lose your engine suddenly. So that's a good teaching tool. And if you have the training, like especially towards the commercial CFI level, demonstrating what it looks like to have power loss at different power settings and how the RPM, the energy management will respond, is really good correlation for the students. But that's a teaching tool. Been talking on this topic for a while. It depends on how fast the decay is. So I hate using the horn because one, and Robinson's especially, okay, high DA, I'll give you that. But it all depends on the rate of the energy change. So one, also some of those Robinsons, they're not tuned correctly. So they're plus or minus 2%. So your rotor RPM could be going off at 99%. That's pretty high. And also, it's one thing if it's kind of slowly going down and then it goes me on the entry. Okay, that's a very slow trend. Versus if it's tanking, then absolutely yes, the mind controls. It's all about more of the totality of the energy and the trend than it is so much of hard points like that. And even still, I've done plenty of touch on auto rotations where we have the low rotor horn going on the whole time in the flare, finish the flare, low rotor horn still going on, and a completely beautiful touchdown. And in fact, if you're light in the helicopter, you're going to have the horn go off almost the entire time. If they're by themselves soloing, they're going to have the rotor horn because the rotor RPM is not going to come back up again. It's going to stay low, especially other helicopters, how they're rigged. As I said, when I was doing, touchdowns and the 407, 505, 206, 206, not so much. The horn's set really low. But the 407, the 505, if you're really light, you're not going to get the rotor RPM. So it's going to hang out that low side the whole time, even into the flare. So again, it's all about training to the aircraft you're in and the level they're into. All right. Vortex ring states, really quick on this one. 1,000 feet AGL minimum for this one, or by manufacturer, whatever's higher. Important piece here, I just know there's other DPs out there that are doing this, and again, that's their prerogative, what they're going to do. I'm going to follow the standards, and what the standards say is promptly recognize, announce, and recover at first indication of vortex ring state. First indication. You should not be getting into full-blown vortex ring state on a check ride. That shouldn't be that. So they should point the indications out. Once you get that bird, once you see the aircraft starting to slip into it, that should be their indication to do the recovery. Now, when it comes to the recoveries, I generally like the standard recovery. If they really want to do Vershard, I will allow, if that's what the school does and teaches. If they want to do Vershard, now that there's guidance and there's actually standards to it, I can allow it. It's been allowed to do. But yeah, that's more, there's a lot of discussion on Vershard recovery, especially lately, and I'm sure Robinson has some updated information on that. You guys probably know more about that than I do, about what Robinson's saying about the Vershard. I just want to point that out there because I know there's some examiners out there that are wanting their students to get into it full-blown for the string state and get out of it on commercial check rides. And I'm like, I can't. I would love for students to be able to demonstrate that, and I like that they can do that. That's cool, but the standards say no. So I'm gonna have to stick with the standard on a check ride. Power plant failure at altitude. I already talked about this one. That's just the ACS, what it says. For the standards, I talked about this: avoid undershooting, overshooting in select area. And again, if you're not teaching your students how to do this stuff, you are putting them at a deficit. So yeah, those are things that I'm seeing, guys. I had a couple, soapboxes and some other stuff, but that's just kind of some of the elements I've seen through it. Interesting. Any questions or comments or anything about that you've seen that are not a legal question that I can't answer for legal reasons?
I have a question, just sort of while maybe people gather their thoughts. I have a question for you. 61-129, adding the single engine SEL, like the airplane commercial rating. It says 100 hours PIC, 50 of which must be in an airplane. I have 100 hours PIC, of course, but not 50 in an airplane. What did you do to get your 50 hours PIC in an airplane? And is it what my thought is? I'm just gonna basically fly solo for 50 hours once I am checked off to fly solo. Is that what you did?
So under 61, if you're gonna jump right to that for the add-ons, then yes, your only option to build PIC time is to go solo in the airplane.
Yeah.
I actually went to a 141 program that had an approved 141 add-on course, and that's where 141 schools are like amazing, because per the appendices for an add-on program, I think it was 55 hours. Their program, of course, there's the minimums for the 141 per the appendix, and then there's what the school actually has. But there's no solo requirement for a 141 add-on program. So you can go in and train like 55 or 60 hours and go right to Checkride without any solo time. So that's why I looked around, shopped, and had to travel a little bit farther to find a 141 school that had an add-on program, which is really hard to find on the airplane side, unfortunately.
There might be one here in Colorado. I'll look. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so that definitely saved me about 100 hours of time.
Yeah. I like soloing. I think it's one of the best things I did for my training was just allowed, having all that solo time was immensely beneficial. I imagine it would be on an airplane too, but that's 50 hours of solo time I've got to accumulate. That's kind of a lot. So to hit that PIC requirement. But.
Yeah. All right, I got a question came through here. All right. How do you cover power failure in a hover autos? Who rolls off, DPE or the student? Stationary or during forward hover, slow roll off, or fast split needles? This is all getting a little bit on the opinion territory. That's fine. We can discuss it. So when it comes to the manipulation on a Checkride, I try to stay off the controls as much as possible. So on a Checkride, the only time I'm really doing the throttle is for the simulated engine failure. Everything else, I try to have them do it with it, unless there's a reason why I need to do that. But typically, most Checkrides, I don't. And to be honest with you, I don't want to put them in a situation where when it comes to the hover auto piece, I don't want to just randomly chop it on them and surprise them to see how they respond. Especially if their flight school's not doing that. And if I do that, then I have to justify why I was on the flight controls doing that, and then I could lead to a potential, bad outcome. I'm like, oh, well, engines always fail. Well, yes, I get that for the surprise thing, but I'm gonna pull up the ACS right now in that area. So, and the other piece too, unlike the power plant failure at altitude, there's verbiage on the hover auto. Let me see if I can share my screen right here to discuss this. I changed it now. I have the commercial pilot ACS up. Okay, so the reason for this one is right here. If you can see, I highlighted it there. Alpha, or skills area 6. It says the applicant exhibits the skill to simulate power plant failure. Versus, it does not say that on failure at altitude under the skills. It has established auto rotation, power off glide, trim auto rotation speed, rotor RPM limits, area, maneuver, make radio calls, terminate approach power recovery. I say altitude as directed by the evaluator. I can direct that, the safe altitude and/or when to do the recovery. Versus the hover auto or power plant failure in a hover does not say that. So again, if I were to chop it on them in a hover, I justify why I'm not allowing them to do that in the skills element part of the task. Now, stationary or forward hover, both are allowed right here under 5. Stationary or forward hover into the wind. I typically like a stationary hover just because what most of the students' flight schools are out there doing. I've done all kinds of different failures. It doesn't really bother me. I'm not uncomfortable with it. It really is what's going to give the best outcome to the student. And if that's what they want to do, okay, fine. But I've never had a student on Checkride want to do one in a forward hover. They usually just want to do it in a stationary hover. So that's typically what they're doing. Slow roll off. Yeah. I'll allow some slow roll, especially on the private level. If they're just doing it smoothly and rolling it off gradually, then yes, I'll generally allow that on private level. It gets commercial. Also depends on, like, I've seen some where it's like, it's not a hover auto, it's a low rotor RPM set down. Yeah, that's not gonna fly for me. Because it's just like a brrrr, and you're going down in, like, inches per second. Yeah, that's not a power plant failure. That's a low rotor RPM set down. Like, yeah, that's not really allowable in my book.
What about height above ground?
That is, well, there's the recommended, per the manufacturer. Some have limits on that. They actually say you're not supposed to. But I mean, wherever they want to do the hover auto at, this is where they're going to, that's up to them. Now, obviously, they're in moderation, right? So if they're in R22 and try to go up to like 10 feet in a private level, I'm be like, all right, buddy, and they're going to go 3, 2, 1, mind controls. That's not going to be good. But, some flight schools teach their students to do only at 1 foot, and other students, they're go up to normal, 3 to 5 feet, or 2 to 4 feet, wherever they're saying to go and hover at now. Long story short, I don't really care. I've done really high hover autos. I've done really low hover autos. Now it's the ones where, like, they're cheating at like the 6 inches. I'm like, dude, do you hover this high, this low? No. Okay, let's go a little higher. Let's hover. Let's go a little higher. And it's usually on the too low side versus the too high side. I'm talking like inches. Like, no, that's not a hover auto. That's a low RPM set down because you're on the ground by the time the throttle's not even like a quarter turn off. So does that answer that?
Yeah. Anybody else? Anything anybody else wants to add? Now's the time. We're only 3 hours and 15 minutes into this conversation, so.
Well, it's another 5 minutes at this point.
Exactly.
I'm on East Coast time, unlike you
Oh
guys.
yeah, look at that.
Hey, I want you to hit on it again. I know we've had discussions before, but maybe for the crowd, and if your opinion's changed on the whole plus or minus 5 knots in the auto rotation.
Ooh. Okay.
I know it's an opinion.
This is an opinion. Absolutely an opinion. All right. Okay. Let me find that in the... I'm just going to do the easier part. Let's go right to the appendix and then go to the hyperlink. So, performance waivers, straight in, auto rotation. We'll do straight in. All right, under the skills element, under the skills element of the task. All right, we're gonna look at number 7 here. Establish power off glide with helicopter trimmed and auto rotation speed plus or minus 5 knots. Okay. So the question is, what is the auto rotation speed?
Well, for max glide or minimum rate of descent, it's different, but
Okay,
Right.
so all right. So some helicopters don't have it published at all. There is no published auto rotation speed. The only referenceable speeds in a lot of helicopters are you have the maximum, and then you have speeds for certain profiles like max glide, minimum rate. So what exactly is the auto rotation airspeed? Well, there is no hard published one. Okay, so then also the next piece to go into this is, okay, compensate for wind speed and direction, avoid undershooting, overspeed in the selected landing area. Well, how are you supposed to do that when the other maneuvers require it? And it goes back to, this has to do with a little bit of common sense. On the airplane side, airplane ACS, it's so by the numbers, there's very little room for interpretation. Helicopter standards, they're all up to interpretation. It's very vague, ambiguous standards because we've always been that way because it has to do that. The airplane guys are so by the numbers on so many different things for a lot of good reasons, but also the way the aircraft fly too with it. So how do I go with this in my interpretation? How do I deal with this in the standards? Okay, so typically on the briefing or even in flight right before you get into the auto rotation, right, you want to do this, you want to do it straight out of the 180. More often than not, it's almost always straight in. Okay, cool, straight in. Hey, how have you been taught to do the straight in? What airspeed are you usually going to go at? Oh, we usually fly at 70 knots. Okay, cool. All right, so let's say 70 knots, R22. All right, so I really personally don't really care that much, within reason, obviously, but if they say 60 or 65 or 70, it doesn't really matter too much to me what they choose to do it with. They start getting below 55 knots, it gets a little hairy in the R22. But anyways, so whatever speed they tell me at, and okay, when they enter, I expecting them to generally hold that. Now, once they enter and establish the glide, I expect them to kind of hold that profile plus or minus 5 knots. Now, once you identify where you're going, and they go to move to address it, they can do whatever the heck they want to do up to the V&E of the aircraft. Right? So what does that mean, right? If they need to do max glide, then do max glide to hit the spot. They have to adjust for overshoot, undershooting. They have to do that. Now, R22 is not a good example because max glide 75 knots. But let's say they are 44. Right? They tell me they're going to do 70 knots, and then they enter, they look at their spot, and they go, oh, we're going to be way short, and then they decide to go max glide, 90 and 90. That's totally fine. That shows mastery of the aircraft. Again, they're doing that intentionally. Now, different scenario here. They tell me they're going 70. They enter the auto rotation, and then they just kind of pitch the nose down and don't say anything. And next thing, our airspeed is going up 80, 85, 90. Rotor RPM is still in the green, but when they go to flare, then the RPM massive balloon. They're all over the place. You know, okay, that is not the standard. Why? Because they didn't inform me. They didn't tell me. There was no reason for us to go to that speed. They didn't hold the airspeed. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't mastery of the aircraft without the outcome. Saying stuff, outcome never in doubt. That was not mastery. The same thing too. If the applicant enters the auto rotation, realizes, oh my gosh, I'm going to be so long, and he wants to bring it back to an OG hover on a Checkride, and does it, and then re-engages and flares beautifully, all within standards. That's absolutely awesome. Right? That was mastery of the aircraft, 100%. Right? And he chose to go to 0 plus or minus 5. That's great. That was his choice. Right? So that's how I look at it, and that shows way more mastery than how good can someone perfectly hold 70 knots the entire way down, yet blow past a spot, and their only reference to hitting a spot is where they enter at the airport they've gone to 1,000 times. That is teaching really bad airmanship. Really bad airmanship. Now, this is on the opinion territory. I still hold to the standards on that, and that's how I interpret the standards, and I haven't heard anything otherwise on that. Because going back to the initial entry, And then everything else after that, it's fair game within the limitations of the aircraft. And again, I'm holding them to what they're doing with it, plus or minus 5, and there's a little bit of interpretation on how to, if they intend to do that. Because what if they didn't fully go max glide? They decided to go 80 and 95% rotor. Okay, but did it work to get to the spot? Was it intentional? Did they demonstrate mastery? Absolutely. Or maybe they didn't, and then we're gonna have a discussion about why that wasn't. That makes sense. And typically, too, the mastery also shows the outcome of the spot placement if they're making adjustments to that. So if they decide to go 90 knots and max glide and they blow past the spot, well, obviously we failed another reference there too. That makes sense. So the way the energy all works together, typically one leads to the other when it comes to this maneuver. So if they didn't hold their airspeed appropriately and they try to do something differently, they're probably not going to hit their spot anyways. So does that hit what we're talking about, Matt?
Beautiful. I love it.
And I gather part of that really is the communication too. You know, the students.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's where teaching students talk about what they're doing.
Yeah.
If I have no clue what's going on in the head of theirs, so if they tell me, great. If not, then I'm expecting them to hold what they're doing. I'm trying to justify afterwards. Well, I really meant to do it that way. Now we're playing hypotheticals, dude, and yeah, that's a problem.
I try to emphasize with students, like, just talk, you know, because a lot of times they're in their head and they're doing stuff, but I'm like, this guy doesn't know you, or this gal don't know you. This is the first time you probably met them, so you got to talk to them like everything. Just verbalize everything that you can. That way they know what you're thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. Same thing on the some of the pre-landing checklist stuff. Right? Like in an R22, do I expect them to pull out a checklist and read it every single? No. Like, do your flow, read out your flow. As long as you do it, if I can't read your mind. That's why I brief on the briefing. I can't read your mind. So if you don't tell me you did your pre-landing checks, I don't know you did them. If I don't know you did them, you didn't do them. Right? That is a common, failure item. Last question here. 5 reasons you fail applicant. I'm going to set more on the topics, which I've covered here in pretty much in detail. The top issues for reasons for new flight maneuvers. Flight maneuver failures are going to be it's going to be simulated engine failure and or emergencies. That's the next one right after that. Straight in auto rotate, or the performance auto rotations, we'll call it. That's typically just not hitting the spot. Alvarados, and that's usually the heading that gets guys on that one. And yeah, no, that's I would say the most common. Those probably it's only 4, but those are the ones that are the typical ones that are most common on the failures that I can come off the top of my head. That the standards are clear and kind of tight on. Maybe we'll get into. Knowledge topics, we've covered these a little bit. In-op equipment, people just fumble with. Aerodynamics, people fumble with. Emergencies, procedures, stuff like that. Regulations, it's always random ones that people don't know. I had one, like airspace. That one was kind of surprising to me. Like, just typical, like, what is VFR for a controlled airport? Completely just, I realize when people spiral and lose those over ground effect stuff. Yeah. That answer your question? Yeah, I see your point. Yeah, the headings on Alvarados. Yeah, least dangerous errors. Yeah, I've been going for a while, but all right. I'm gonna play devil's advocate. I don't have an answer to this one, and it's quite funny to me. It makes me chuckle. But all right. So, when you guys are teaching slope landings, all right. So, and the whole approach at a 45. Okay, does that mean a heading of 45 or a ground track of 45 towards the slope? And this is an open discussion for anybody to come up on here and justify your position, because I personally have I don't care either way. But please tell me your thoughts on this one.
I have an
because
opinion.
it makes me laugh.
I have an opinion just because when we were flying in the mountains, this is a great tool, by the way. When we were flying in the mountains, Matt taught me about approaching a ridge at a 45, and that's a ground track 45, right? So my theory is keep that same mentality when working on a slope, right? As opposed, ground track 45 makes sense to me because we're already doing it when we're mountain
Yeah, I
flying.
agree with the ground track. Obviously, not straight, not sideways. Just to the side. On that note, I'll tell you how my experience was with slopes. They love to do them here in Florida for some reason on the taxiways. That little baby kind of slope thing, and
'Cause it's
I
Florida.
try to challenge a little bit more. Look for that 5 degrees. Obviously depending on the progression with the student.
Yeah, and actually, so you asked about pet peeves here. That's actually something about slopes that on check rides where I kind of realize. I'll tell you my rant on slopes here in a second. But on check rides, I'll be like, hey, find us a slope. And they're like, is this good? Is this good? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Show me a slope. And they're like, but my instructor always tells me like where to go, and I'm like, well, go where you normally go, dude. Like, just pick me a slope. And they have such a hard time with it. And the funny part is, this is my whole thing. Unless I'm going up in the mountains and doing like a skier drop off, or I'm doing a nose in or something like that, which is, I wouldn't consider that a slope lane. That's a whole different maneuver. That's a toe in landing or a one skid landing. That's a completely different maneuver than what we're talking about here, okay? So when, as a commercial pilot, would you ever intentionally go to a slope?
My scenario is I like to pose, okay, so you got somebody, a paying passenger, right? And they ask you to drop them off at this off airport location, and it just happens to be a slope, so you have to not only land at the slope properly, but allow them to come off and brief them, obviously make sure that they're going the right direction when they're exiting. That's what I like to go off of.
So as thousands of hours of flying all across, doing all kinds of things, the only time I've ever intentionally gone to a slope, has been in training. Now, there's been places where I've had to land that were sloped, right? But I picked the best option for me and then landed. But never did I look at a slope and go, that's a good slope. I'm going to approach on a 45 and go over here and put the helicopter. No, I've never done that, right? And that being said, if I'm in an area and it's not like it's like a perfect slope and I have to land there, it's usually like a landing area where it's like it's uneven and the least slopey slope, exactly, right? And a lot of times it's hard. It's high grass. Like, you don't really know the slope until you're already on it, which is why teaching the students to recognize the two distinct points of contact, the first skid and the second skid. And then also, the bigger the helicopter, it should be 4 distinct points of contact, not 2. Whole different conversation. But anyways, coming across that's where you don't want them to just like plop it down, right? You want to start normal set down until it's not normal anymore. Then you're going to gauge how much of a slope it is. See if you're on a cyclic authority, okay, and then we can come down, right? That's how they should be approaching. A slope landing is just a normal set down until it isn't, and then they should recognize it and then continue to bring the helicopter down safely or abort and bring it back up again. It's not a surprise, right? I've been surprised by slopes operationally before. But again, it's the same thing. You just, all right, I'm coming down. There's my one skid, second skid. Oh, wait, come on. We're sloped here. Okay. All right. Am I good? Am I stable? Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're sloped here. All right, let's go. Right.
Yeah.
It's never like an intentional slope thing. So the little 45 thing is just very odd to me. That's the whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, the people that are on the fence that are like, oh, you have to like approach and then turn 45 degrees. I'm like, but then you're turning your tail towards an obstacle, which doesn't make any sense. And another pet peeve of mine is when I see these flight schools out there, and let's say there's like a hill like this, right? Well, I'll put it more like this. So it's like a hill like that, right? So many times I see them always go right here at the base of the slope. They always want to do their slope landings here. And I'm like, why don't you go here? And they're like, well, I don't want to slide down the slope. I'm like, have you read the accident data on this stuff? You're more likely to hit your tail into the obstacle than you ever are rolling over in these slopes, most likely. And if they do roll over, it's not because they just roll down the slope. It's because the student got a pivot point and didn't correct appropriately. It's either because they're moving laterally, or they just overcorrected on a pickup or on the set down on too high of a slope. But if you pick the right point on the top end, you can still have very gradual descent. And the other part to that too is you're teaching the students how to identify a slope, which is the real skill set, is when you're actually flying, how to look at a terrain and go, that's too sloped, that is going to be enough. And that's the true skill element you want to teach your students. I don't really, that's why I don't really care about the 45 or it makes me laugh, because I'm like, real world, unless I'm going to the mountains and doing that stuff, that's a whole different maneuver. It doesn't really matter to me. I could be wrong. There could be someone out there that does it all day long that I'm not aware of, but I've never experienced that. So if the people know about that, please tell me. But it doesn't really track. And again, all my slope landings operationally in the real world were not intentional. They were just, I had to land there, or I found them on the way down. But really, yeah, you want to make sure you clear your tail and don't back your tail into obstacles.
Yeah, that's real practical. That's how it should be taught.
Should be, but some people have their adages, which is the other part too. Another silly adage which comes in places. Your pre-landing checks. All right. What is a pre-landing check? Everyone has them slightly different, but what's your pre-landing check? Someone read it off.
T's piece in the green warning lights out. Plenty of fuel is what I like to.
Okay, Paul. Anybody else? Okay, Carpete. All right, the same thing, right? You agree with what he said?
Yeah.
You agree with what he said?
Calvary has that auto Carpete, man. I'm
Okay.
spoiled.
Let me ask you this: on pre-landing, okay? Why do you care about fuel? You're landing.
Just something. I mean, as a CFI, it's been drilled into me.
So as the CFI, that's your checklist, right? Do I have enough fuel to do my next maneuver, my next lap in the pattern? But when you're teaching a commercial pilot, right, does it really matter if they're checking fuel on landing? Because what happens if the fuel's too low? Oh, I'm still gonna land. So shouldn't that be a pre-takeoff check? Not necessarily a pre-landing check? That's just the one that that's just the part that is so funny to me. And this all happened because in the Gulf of Mexico, in a 135 operation, for a pre-landing check, they put fuel. And I was like, we're landing.
Yeah.
What do I need to check for fuel? And they're like, well, and because of primacy, right? That's what they were taught. That's what they've been doing. That's what they've been teaching and repetition and all that. They could not break that. And it was so funny to me because I was like, but it doesn't really matter. And the same thing for a go around. I mean, if you're cutting the fuel to that low of a gnat's ass of fuel where you can't do a go around and a little bit of a loop, a little circle back around the land, you really cut it way too close.
Yeah.
I mean, way too close. So, anyways, this has been a very long time we've been talking here. This has been thoroughly enjoyable. Any other DP related questions? We'll save some more of these topics and conversations for instructional methods. I definitely need to come back and have another conversation with you guys later. But anything else pressing DP wise before I cut out?
No, definitely. From my side, thank you so much for your time. This was very informative, interactive. I love the fact that you opened it to questions as you went through, even though they were through the chat. So I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see you back again.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well,
I think
you can message me on here if you need to, if you have questions. I can also throw my email and phone number in the chat here. for you guys. But if there's anything else, any closing elements?
Yeah, I think I speak for everybody on that. We really appreciate you being here and looking forward to the next opportunities to talk with you too. Somewhere down the road, for sure.
All right, guys. Well, be safe out there. Said, feel free to reach out if you need anything.
All right, that wraps up Helicopter Pilot Study Group number 30. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks, everybody.
Here, guys.